is looking at you, kid.
I'm Charles Foster Kane!
Hey, Stella!
Suck on this.
What is happening, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Wrong Reel, a podcast for hardcore cinephiles where we tackle everything from Jean-Luc Picard to Jean-Luc Godard or Jean-Luc Godard to Jean-Luc Picard. I can't remember how I used to say it back in the pure audio days. In any case, today I'm joined by seasoned Wrong Reel veteran Simon O'Neill, who, in the words of Raymond Chandler, is just a guy who's paid to do other people's laundry. But in his spare time, Simon's also a journalist and a filmmaker, and it is a pleasure to have this chance to talk with him about the 80th anniversary of The Big Sleep. Director Howard Hawks is on my Mount Rushmore of favorite filmmakers, so I've been watching this movie for decades. But thanks to Mr. O'Neill, finally cracked open the book as well. And so I'm feeling fully prepared for a lively discussion of this incredible story. But with that all that out of the way, Mr. O'Neill, how the hell are you? And what have you been up to since we last spoke? I think it's been 3 years since we recorded together when we did Wrong Reel 666.
666, yeah.
For The Omen, which I reposted earlier this summer for the 50th anniversary.
From Philip Marlowe to Jean Harlow was one of the ones that used to
hell yeah,
back in the day, so we can just throw that out there as I kind of remember bringing the curtain down on the audio Wrong Reel back in 666, which was a beautiful moment. 666, and it's one of my favorite films and one of the scariest horror movies I've ever seen.
Even scarier are the harrowing tales you told about your upbringing and how you were exposed to the film. I was like, this story's too good. It's got to go in the video.
As a recruitment tool for the priests. So since then, I've been working away. I haven't made a short in Paris. It's been a couple of years since 2 years since I made a film. So I've got two on the back burner. I tend to, do two at the same time is a good. I remember just coming out of COVID, we did two shorts on separate weekends, one after the other. When you're in that headspace. So I'm going to try and do that. And then I've been working for the paper. I mean, I was hired as a copywriter or as a kind of commercial or whatever you call it, but I've been doing more editorial stuff, which I like a lot because, I like both. The other one gets me travel around the country a bit more, but
your tribute to Tony Stella was beautifully written, and I absolutely loved reading it.
Oh, thanks very much. I mean, it was probably my, one of the things that I liked to be able to write it. I wish, obviously, I didn't have to write it. I was, devastated to hear that. And the weird thing, probably why, I don't know, maybe that's why I thought the Chandler thing was because you were the person who told me about Tony. And the reason, we did an episode years ago on all the various actors who have played Philip Marlowe over the years. And there have been so many, like there's obviously Humphrey Bogart, Robert Mitchum, Elliot Gould, there's James Caan, like a lot of people have had a go at playing this incredible character. And when in the 40s, there was a kind of a first flurry of the Marlowe books being translated, and then a late one in the 70s. There really hasn't been anything the last couple of decades. I know Neil Jordan did a film a few years ago called Marlowe. I haven't seen it yet, but it got terrible reviews, and, the title put me off. There's so many amazing titles in his. You call it Marlowe. It's like Irving Welsh did a book, he decided to write a crime novel, and he called it's on my shelf over there, and he called it Crime. It's like, I'm just going to write the definitive crime novel. It's called Crime. It's like the kind of title sells the book, and it's a really good book. But I just thought that was a bit lazy. But anyway, one of the adaptations was called The Brasher Doubloon, and it is an adaptation of the Raymond Chandler novel The High Window, and it stars George Montgomery, not Robert Montgomery, not the great Robert Montgomery who did Lady in the Lake, but this guy George Montgomery. I don't really know a lot about him, and for years I'd kind of put it off, just thinking it's kind of lower tier Chandler stuff, and he has like a pencil mustache as well. Like I could really think, Marlowe with looks like a spiv who'd sell you a secondhand car kind of thing. But I decided to check it out. It was on YouTube, and I watched it, and I really enjoyed it because that's the thing with Chandler. Like even second-rate Chandler / Marlowe adaptations are probably better than a lot of the other stuff that's going out there. Because
yeah, it's like sex. Even a bad sexual experience is better than no sex at all. So
absolutely, hey, even cold pizza is better than no pizza. So
exactly.
yeah. So I just dropped you a message to say, hey, remember that? You know, I always thought this was going to be a lame, and I just watched it, and it's quite entertaining. And that's when I messaged you with the link to the YouTube clip, and that's when you told me. I was like, oh, geez, you know. So that was horrible. And so yeah, over the next couple of days, I remember saying to you, like, I kind of went away and thought about it, and a lot of people were posting. There's really lovely tributes to Tony, and I said, well, I should do something in the paper, seeing as I have access to. I mean, obviously, I don't know if they're going to publish it, or I don't know if it'll go ahead.
Also, you and Tony worked together. He did that amazing poster for a dispensary of death, and so it was
100%.
People who knew him were the ones who should have been writing the tributes.
100%, and like I was privileged to work with Tony for that. I mean, obviously we got to know each other through the Wrong Reel, and through that I was one of many people who would bat DMs to Tony on Twitter, and you know, I've got lots of old Japanese movies and Chinese movies from my time over in Asia, and I would like send him cover. He could be like, "Oh, I remember that ghastly cover," or "Oh yeah, I remember that horrible cover," and those DVDs or whatever, and we chat about stuff. But then when I did the film Dispensary of Death, I asked Tony to do the poster. It's on my wall over there.
Hell yeah,
it's fucking amazing. That's the quad version of it there. Absolutely love it. And he did that, but more than that, as you know, like when Tony did his art, like the various composite bits of the poster, and then would put them all together. But then, you know, like the way they're sort of so gnarly and oily and finger splattered, and then the crispness of the text and everything would come in and just make it all whole and lovely. And so I had sent him a cut of the film with just on that, to short to say that, like, just what it was like working with him, even on this minor scale. Like when I sent him a cut of the movie, I had found some sort of horror font and I had put it on, and he's like, no, we're not using this. You know, like we're going to go straight back to. He gave me this really sexy sort of George Romero type, trashy late 80s video. Exactly what I was looking for.
He was a great artist, but his knowledge of graphic design and titles was first rate. I think that's underrated sometimes when people appreciate his work. It's just how good he was with fonts and titles and that sort of thing. He could have had a career just doing that.
Absolutely. And just, you know, knowing where the black space should be the white space, you know, how everything relates to each other. And then I said, it would be cool if, like, we have the title comes up, I have, you know, and then you know, there's a gunshot and all that, and Tony said, oh, well, what I could do is I could have like one of the letters go like this with a blood splatter, you know. And I thought, well, that's a fucking amazing idea. So I because it would go with the audio. So he sent, like, when he sends me the DPS, he didn't just send me that poster, you know, he sent me all the files, and there's two, like, there's a clean file of the title, and there's a file with the little blood splatter coming out of the O. So when I did the bang of the gunshot, the blood comes on, and it just looks cool. So it slides up really slowly, and then goes bang. And then when I was editing it, I kind of nudged a button once by mistake. When I was on that site, you know, I pressed something wrong, and it's because it zoomed out, and I thought, oh, that looks amazing. So the text, Tony's text, kind of goes up, and then you hear a gunshot, and the blood splatters, and then I added in like someone cocking a shotgun, and it goes, the type goes in and out, and I made a little mini MPEG and sent it to Tony on. You know, I was like, oh, it's just tweaking the title. And he's like, nice, you know. So we bat things forward and back like that. It just, I mean, it must. To work on a massive project must be amazing, but even on that small little short film, he was totally invested and just so amazing to work with, bounce ideas off, and I just feel really privileged that I did. I'm glad I asked him, you know, to do it,
and nothing was more fun and more exciting than if you said or did something where you got an enthusiastic response. I think I mentioned this when we were discussing your article, but he's one of those people where I always was like actively seeking his approval, because there's nothing more withering and kind of demoralizing when he's like, oh, this is wretched, or why are you talking about this? Or but like, and he could be ruthlessly critical when he had a mind to. And so, but when he would kind of applaud and approve something, it was so satisfying. So yeah, he is dearly missed. And every time I see anyone posting posters on his profile, it just makes me want to cry. Like I love that they're keeping his memory alive, but every time I see him, it just makes me miss him every single time. So yeah, Tony, wherever you are sorely missed.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like I told you before, sorry, just I don't hijack it, but yeah, it was just wonderful experience working with him, but like just chatting with him. But again, when we were doing the poster, I had loads of stills that were taken on the set, but too many. Sometimes you're like, give me 10 really nice, of this short film that I made, and I sent Tony a couple of posters, and he was like, because the process, like, I'm not sure exactly, like a lot of the art was scanned or whatever it was, or like however the image was composed. So in this particular, there were a lot of shots in this film of Neve, the lead actress, with the shotgun, and they were kind of pointing like this, and Tony's like, no, you need to go like that for the poster. It's got to really like.
He remembers the poster for Deliverance, where you have that 12 gauge pointed towards the viewer,
or the Dirty Harry and all those sort of ones. So yeah, so I actually got Neve to call over and get the white coat and the blood, and we had a bit of fun. We got machetes, and like we had all the machete in one hand and the gun, and he was like, oh, I like this one with the two weapons, I like this and that. Anyway, he went off and sort of said, yeah, now we got something to work with, so he kind of, so art directed the poster, obviously, because that's what he did best.
Totally. If memory serves, you also had a toy shotgun that you were walking around Dublin with for like a day or so. When I was over there in 2022, we needed a toy shotgun for the scenes and toners when we were talking about Fistful of Dynamite. But I remember you were like walking around Dublin with your toy shotgun for a while, and you had to go meet some girl for a drink or whatever. I was like, oh, are you going to take the gun home first? And you're like, oh, I don't know. But it was always funny that you was like, oh, I've got a toy shotgun. I'll bring it to the set.
That's I can't remember. It must be around here somewhere. That's actually an airsoft. They call them airsoft. They're like BB guns or pellet guns or whatever. Like
they hit hard. Yeah,
not hard pellets, but like something like that. Anyway, but they're like, I wanted to have a shotgun, and if you're doing that, officially you need an armorer, you need the whole 9 yards, you need someone on the set. But anyway, I got that for $20, €20 online, and all good.
Yeah, in New York, you can't even buy a facsimile. I tried to get a toy replica of a gun just for like YouTube thumbnails, so I could like have like a gun to my head and that sort of thing. In the state of New York, you can only order like Nerf guns, because like in the 90s, when cops were a little bit more trigger happy, there were some situations where people were riddled with like 100 bullets and things like that. Shouldn't be laughing. In any case, it's hard to get a real gun or a fake gun in the state of New York.
Yeah, so I watched Casino the other night, and they shoot the guy because he's got a fucking Subway sandwich in his. He's got the Subway sandwich and wrapped in foil. They think it's a gun. They just blow him away because they're also terrified of Nicky Santora and his gang. But yeah, when you shoot with guns, you have to notify the guards. You have to tell them, because we did it in Dublin city centre in a pharmacy. It's very famous, and you have to notify the guards and let them know you're doing it. But obviously, if you're doing a guerrilla movie, you don't do any of that. You just take your chances, and
you ask for forgiveness, not permission.
Exactly. Afterwards, that's the way to do it.
Well, let's start easing into the topic at hand. The reason we decided to do this is because you're a massive Raymond Chandler aficionado. So where would you like to start? The floor is yours. Should we talk about your upcoming article?
Yeah, well, I hope it's published now. But I mean, if it's not, it doesn't matter. I can put it on my website. So my editor was away last week. Or he's been away for the last week or two. He's been on holidays. Always on holidays, that fella. But I had said to him, it's the 80th anniversary, because I've been doing a few articles about things that I have one there recently about building or architecture in Dublin that kind of annoys me, and I always wanted to write something about Raymond Chandler, and specifically his Irish connection, because people may or may not know that Raymond Chandler not only had an Irish mother, but he lived in Ireland as a small boy, and I'll do a brief potted history, but and as an excuse, I thought, it was 80 year. The Big Sleep was released at the end of August. I think it was August 31st or 28th, 1946.
Yeah, the New York premiere was on August 23rd, and then I think it went nationwide about a week later. So yeah, we are right on target when it comes to the anniversary.
On it. Yeah. So I thought, oh, that's a good, because I was looking up and going, was it the birth or the anniversary of his death anytime soon? I was like 59, 29. I can't wait that long. So I thought, oh, the 80-year anniversary of The Big Sleep is a good excuse to do an article about it. And also said to the editor, you say to a lot of people, because oftentimes if I'm doing it for the Sunday Times, the Irish edition, it'll possibly resonate with readers more if there's an Irish angle. And I say, oh, Raymond Chandler grew up in Ireland, and most people go, what? Raymond Chandler grew up in Ireland? That, why isn't more made of this, or why haven't I heard of this before? So I thought that would be a good excuse to write the article. And also, like, I had this sort of, when we did the first episode, I mentioned that I kind of think that Chandler's upbringing had a big influence, as with most writers, on his work, but either subconsciously or consciously, and never more so in the Big Sleep, when he talks, with some of the characters, the fact that a very prominent character is Irish, his grisly end that he comes to, talk about that a little bit later, but I think they're kind of very influenced on his sort of life story, so I thought it would be an excuse to do the article. And when I was doing the article and that was coming out, I thought, oh, it might be a nice excuse to do a wrong reel as well, because
totally
I haven't done one of those in a while, and we ain't getting any younger, and whatever, why the hell not, so.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, not to keep talking about Tony, but as I mentioned on a couple of different videos, what it reminded me, and this, we should never need this to remind of this, but if you have an idea for a screenplay or a video you want to do, or a movie you want to make, or a painting you want to draw, don't wait. There's tomorrow is not a guarantee. You could get hit by a bus at any second. So if you have a cool idea, or if you've always been itching to do something that's creative, yeah, go ahead and pull the trigger. Like, what's that old expression? Like, either shit or get off the pot. So yeah, today, yeah. And also, once again, Howard Hawks, for me, my Mount Rushmore is always changing, whether it's Orson Welles or Howard Hawks or Sam Peckinpah or John Huston or Alfred Hitchcock or whomever, but there's certain filmmakers that are always in the mix. Howard Hawks will always be on there. He was a master genre hopper. And The Big Sleep's one of those movies where I always feel like I appreciate it, and then I come back around to it a few years later and I'm like, oh, now I finally really deeply appreciate it. But the reality is I'm 50 years old and I'm still saying to myself, now I finally get it. I finally have kind of come to terms with the grandeur of The Big Sleep. It's just a one-of-a-kind movie that just makes my spirit soar. And it's not my favorite Howard Hawks movie. That's also a matter of debate, whether it's To Have and Have Not or Red River or whatever the case might be. But yeah, he was a master storyteller. And actually, I got a great little clip of the Gray Fox of Hollywood himself, and I'm stealing the title from Todd McCarthy's book, which is the final word on his career. But here's a clip of Howard Hawks talking about the art of filmmaking and just being a storyteller.
I've had no trouble from that time on figuring out where the camera ought to go, what you should do, telling a story. Because in my opinion, the director is just a storyteller. And he ought to use the best way photographically, and the best way with titles, and the best way with action that he can tell a story.
And that little clip comes from the documentary. It's a German documentary called Howard Hawks, A Hell of a Good Life, but it was made in the late 70s. And the best documentary about him, which I love and adore, is called Howard Hawks, American Artist. Almost impossible to find. I saw it on VHS multiple times in the late 90s. And when I did a two-parter audio podcast about his career right before our Omen podcast, American Artist was still available online in some places. Now you can't find it at all, so which is very frustrating. In any case, yeah, Raymond Chandler is where we're going to start, but Howard Hawks is where this conversation is going to end. And so I'm relishing the opportunity to celebrate one of my childhood and adult heroes.
Yeah, I'm a big fan as well of The Have and Have Not, and I'd say The Big Sleep is probably my favorite Howard Hawks movie, because it's possibly my favorite movie of all time. Although that changes and everything, but I think it's just it's one of the most entertaining movies ever made. Totally. Just in terms of, like, I mean, it's sexy, it's funny, it's violent. It's great music. The photography is beautiful. Like, it's got a lot of the element. Like, a lot of film noirs have parts of the elements, and some people don't even consider it a film noir. I was watching the Eddie Mueller, the guy who does the film Noir Alley, and he's like, is it the greatest film noir ever made? No. But is it one of the most entertaining films ever made? Yes. And
do you think some people don't include it with the other film noir because the budget is so lush and lavish? Obviously, To Have Not had been a massive runaway smash success. And usually when you're talking about film noir, you're talking about movies that are made on something like Detour, which is shot like in 8 days for like $5. And so they're having to take a lot of shortcuts to disguise their lack of budget. Maybe because The Big Sleep is a big, prestigious Warner Brothers production, maybe people don't want to include it alongside movies like Out of the Past and things like that, just because it's too respectable, too glossy. But for me, it's as film noir gets. It's cynical. For me, film noir is less of a style or a genre. It's more of like a mood. You need that cynicism, and there's plenty of that cynicism with characters like General Sternwood scattered throughout. And yeah, I mean, film noir is obviously, the phrase was coined by the French when it just means dark film. Like post-World War II movies had post-World War II cynicism, and nobody was more cynical than Raymond Chandler. And this is the Raymond Chandler adaptation. And I would say 90% of the best dialogue in this movie comes straight from the text. And we'll be giving examples of that later in the video. Yeah.
I think, it is definitely a film noir. I mean, it is, like I mentioned in the article, as people say, if you become an adjective, if your name, like if the movie was Fellini-esque, we know what it means. It's all this madcap humor and family and surrealism. Or for film, if it's Lynchian, we know what it is. It's kind of, weird and, strange, and we're not sure what's going on. And if you say it's Chandler-esque, we immediately know what you mean. It's fog and shadows and neon and steam and femme fatales and tough guys coming out of the corner with knuckle dusters, and and it just conjures up a whole world, and you've created that world. So yeah, I think it is film noir, and I think it is, of course, slightly more of a prestige, but it still doesn't come across as a huge big budget movie. It's still rickety in places. There's back projection, and the sets are fairly small.
And you can see the back of like the Warner Brothers headquarters, and certain. I mean, a lot of it was shot just on the Warner Brothers lot, like on little, like it was not sound stages, some sound stages, but they had like little like fake communities. But Howard Hawks, because he had profit participation in the movie, even though he went way over schedule, he was hell bent upon keeping the budget low because he knew he would make more money. So he cut every corner that he possibly could in terms of like reusing sets or using existing sets and that sort of thing. So this is right around the time of Howard Hawks' career where he started getting really powerful and really successful. And he was also a compulsive gambler and usually squandered all of his gains from movies, but he was determined to make as much money off this movie as humanly possible.
Yeah, and it's like, as well, unlike, say, Out of the Past, has this amazing opening shot where we're behind Robert Mitchum and he's driving along the countryside in Maine or somewhere, and then it goes into all flashback. And a lot of the sort of films from the film noirs we remember from the 40s, they become famous because they use like on-set locations, and it gives that gritty look, whereas The Big Sleep it's almost like it is a bit Lynchian because it all happens on the studio lot. Like even the streetscapes are fake. Everything's fake. That house that he goes to, it's only got like one little bit of dirt road. He's people coming, he ducks down. It's like,
and they use that set like 4 times throughout the movie. It's like, do you have any other locations you plan on visiting over the course of this movie? Keep going back to it.
In both versions. And it's this little suburb in the middle of, Brentwood or wherever the hell it is. And it's tiny. The camera can't really pan left or right. So it has, that's kind of hokey. It doesn't make it look like, it's not Lawrence of Arabia. It certainly seems. But that makes it, within this little world, it's just this kooky little noir world that all weird things can happen in. So that helps with the atmosphere of it as well.
Well, tell us a little bit about 1939 when Raymond Chandler first cranked this out. Where was he in his career? Kind of how much success had he enjoyed? How deep into the Philip Marlowe series was he? So just give us kind of the 101 on the origin.
Let me give you a potted history of Raymond Chandler. So Raymond Chandler was born in 1888 in Chicago, and his mother was Irish. His mother was Florence Thornton, and she was from Waterford in Ireland. And Waterford, I'm in Wicklow, which is south of Dublin, and if I was to get in my car and drive for an hour and a half south, I'd arrive in Waterford City if I went the right way. And she emigrated to America in sometime in the late 1800s, and she met Morris Chandler, who was American. Now the thing is, they were both Quakers, so they were, from a sort of, small, I know, marginalized or whatever, like a little sect type community. And he was born in America, but he had traces back to the same Waterford Quaker community a couple of generations before, so they probably were brought together in a church social or something. There was no Tinder or Bumble in those days, so you were church or work or places like that were where you met. And so they met and they married, and they had Raymond, their only child. They didn't have any more children, partly due to the fact that when Ray was about 7 years of age, Morris Chandler up and left without so much as a bye or leave. Morris Chandler was a raging alcoholic and a misanthrope, and he's
one of us.
He was one of us. Yeah, obviously the domestic life didn't sit with him, and one day he just walked out the door and never came back. And so Florence was forced to return to Ireland with little Ray in tow. So you can imagine sort of the stigma of being a single mother in the 1890s in a small community within a small religious community,
and the child's a Yank on top of everything.
Exactly. And add to that the fact that the family, the Thorntons, didn't think they didn't approve of marriage in the first place. So there was a lot of schadenfreude. There was a lot of, well, we told you that guy was a complete bum, and now you're back here. So yeah, they moved back to Waterford. There's a little plaque on Cathedral Square in Waterford. That's where the Thorntons had their legal practice, and the plaque, acknowledges Raymond Chandler lived here. And so he was wandering around, and a lot of people think that's where subconsciously the Marlowe character was born, like that Chandler would watch his mother and how she was crushed, and how, all these things that she went through, and he thought, when I get older, I'm going to invent a man that nobody can bribe, nobody can tell, and he's going to be this incorruptible character who will save women, nothing will put him off his path. And it's somehow in the subconscious that was part, there are loads of different elements to the Marlowe character, but like one of the things about Marlowe is he's completely incorruptible. You can't buy him off. You can't, he will bend the rules. He will do lots of things. He'll plant evidence. He'll do loads of things to get his clients out of trouble, but he can't be bought. He's very,
in a world of corruption, he is one of the few that is incorruptible. And $25 a day plus expenses, and he will fight your battles for you or take out your laundry.
Exactly. So then when he was about 12 or 13, he went to Dulwich College. He had a uncle who was fairly well to do, who paid for his education. He went to English public school, Dulwich College, in the kind of early 1900s. And then when the First World War broke out, towards the end of the First World War, he enlisted with the Canadian Expeditionary Force and was sent over to France to fight in the trenches. Jesus. And he quickly rose to I got a quote here that it's in the article there somewhere. He became sergeant quite quickly, and so he was leading men over the top into the bar. Once you have led a squadron of men into machine gun fire, nothing is ever the same again. So that was one of his.
Here's the line: once you have had to lead a platoon of men into direct machine gun fire, nothing is ever the same again. Yeah, it's like just watch Paths of Glory, and you'll know what he's talking about.
So when he was there in France, his unit was attacked by German artillery. It was bombed. And when the dust cleared, he was the only one left alive. And he went back to the UK to recuperate. He joined the RAF. He learned to fly a plane. It's fine. You've got the Howard Hawks one. I've got Tom Heine's biography of Raymond Chandler. It's the definitive one. and it's called Raymond Chandler, a biography.
It's like Irving Welsh's book, Crime.
Yeah, I mean, like, for example.
Although I shouldn't insult these guys, because the name of this video most likely is going to be The Big Sleep, 80th Anniversary Review with Simon O'Neill, unless we could think of something better.
Yeah, well, I mean, whatever, SEO friendly and all that, but like, you're writing about someone who writes these really florid lines of English, you could come up with something a bit more. But it's a great book, and one of the details that he throws in, while he was recuperating in England, Chandler learned how to fly a biplane, just when he was at the RAF, which is sort of a line in the biography, which could be a whole chapter about someone else's life. And then he became a journalist. He worked for The Spectator and the Westminster Gazette and a couple of others, and he was writing poetry at the time and writing articles and stuff like that. This was all still in London. And then he had he got Florence and himself went back to the US, and first went to Chicago, which is where he was born. But eventually they moved, obviously, to LA, where all his books are set. And he married an older woman after lots of affairs. He married a woman who was much older, but what was made weird about it was that she was actually the stepmother of the guy that he enlisted for the First World War with. So
interesting.
That's all a bit odd, but so he moved to the west coast of the States, and he got a job in the oil business when people were sort of putting these derricks into the ground, and like just black gold was coming out. So he rose up the ranks, and he did fairly well there. And he worked for the Dabney Oil Company, and he was an executive, and he was earning lots of money, and life was good. And I actually was in LA a couple of years ago, and I brought this with me, which is the Raymond Chandler map of Los Angeles, which is fantastic. It's done by
he and James Elroy probably done more to flesh out the dark, shadowy corners of LA than any other writers alive or who have ever lived.
And it's from the Herb Lester Associates, if anyone wants to buy one. It's an actual physical map, and it has all the locations that are still there. And the Dabney Oil Company building is one of those 19th century buildings that hasn't been demolished in LA. So I went down there, and actually at the time this was written, it was closed. It says it's closed, but actually when I went there, they'd reopened it, and there was a little hotel there, and you could go in and have coffee and breakfast. And I had breakfast in the lobby where Raymond Chandler used to come in every day to clock in and clock out when he was going to work in the oil business, which was pretty cool. And around the corner, there's the location of Florian's, which is a nightclub in Farewell, My Lovely. And anyways, loads of locations. I took the map and did my Raymond Chandler tour of LA. I went up to see the Double Indemnity House and stuff like that. And
very nice.
The Long Goodbye, Elliot Gould's.
And didn't Chandler co-write the screenplay for Double Indemnity? Obviously, the James N. Cain novel, but who did he co-write the script with?
With Billy Wilder.
Gotcha. That's a good writing partner.
Yeah, it's a good writing partner. I mean, before I forget, because this was in my mind, I mean, Chandler is a very fascinating person, I think. I don't know why, I'm a bit obsessed with him, but Billy Wilder worked with him. Chandler was nominated for 2 Academy Awards for his first 2 screenplays that he wrote, Double Indemnity, the first one, and then The Blue Dahlia the following year. Didn't win either. But when he was old, when he was retired, Billy Wilder, looking back on his career, he said, it's funny, I've worked with the most incredible people, the Kirk Douglases, the Burt Lancaster, all the Jack Lemmons, like all the huge Hollywood stars. And the only two people that people want to know most about are Marilyn Monroe and Raymond Chandler. That's because they're so sort of mysterious, and people can't really get a handle on what they're really like.
Yeah, I love Jack Lemmon, but he's not mysterious at all. He's just kind of a lovable goofball.
Yeah. So things were going good for Raymond Chandler then, and the shadow of the demon drink was in the background. He was a big boozer. I mean, he used to go out with the work crowd and get fairly loaded. He started having blackouts around, waking up going, what the hell did I do last night? He was also having affairs with several of the secretaries in work, because he was a handsome guy. We most of the file pictures we see of him, he's kind of an elderly, prematurely aged, middle-aged gentleman. But in his 20s and 30s, he was a bit of a stud, and he was, putting it about in the office, drinking too much, various disciplinary procedures, until eventually he was fired, or he was laid off, he was made redundant. So he was sort of staring, he was in his 40s at this stage, staring 50 in the face, like mid-40s, no job, obviously, wondering what to do with his life. And he loved motor cars. Like, I think for that whole generation, the people who moved out to California, Tom Heine describes it really well. Once they got a car, like for the previous hundreds of years, people were just stuck where they were, or unless they had a horse or something, some way to get around. But when mass-produced motor cars came out, and obviously LA was so underpopulated then compared to what it is now, you could just jump in the car and drive out a few miles, have a picnic.
Yeah, drive up the Pacific Coast Highway.
Exactly. It just seems so idyllic to him, and Chandler loved it, especially the sort of cloistered life he'd had in Ireland and in the UK. And but while he was driving along, he would pick up these novels, like these cheap. That's a collection of Raymond Chandler's pulp fiction short stories called Fingerman, and they'd be published like by Ace and these publishers, and they would just these seamy stories and these pulp novels. And he obviously had always fancied himself at having a go at being a writer. He thought, I could do this. So he started writing these short stories and publishing
also in
them.
the late 30s, you could put into these kind of trashy detective stories ingredients that were not allowed due to the Hollywood production code. Starting in 34, exactly. Censorship was much more prevalent in Hollywood. But if you read a lot of trashy thrillers from the 30s, 40s, and 50s, there's pornography, there's homosexuality, there's all sorts of stuff that you would never see in a Hollywood movie. And it's like, whoa, this is where all the good stuff is. Yeah.
Like we did an episode about David Goodis, and he used to write these, like they would, like when I was a kid, there was a great TV series on called Minder, and it was all set in London. And the reason everyone liked it, because every week there'd be a fight and maybe a bit of boob, and that was like that's a pre-internet. That's all you got,
Yeah.
But, and what more could you want on a Saturday night? And it was
exactly a bit of boobs, all you need.
Exactly. With David Goodis, it was like there was going to be lots of sex and there's going to be lots of violence. And Chandler, the same. There's sudden sporadic violence, but obviously he decided there's no point regurgitating what everyone else does. I'm going to do something different. So he sort of leaned into the stylism and I suppose the florid prose, the spare but tough, but whatever. And he started writing these books, these stories, Guns at Cyrano's and Red Wind, and all of these really cool titles. And then in 1938 he wrote The Big Sleep. He said, the short stories they feature a private detective, a lot of them. He's called John Almays or something in a few of them, but it's pretty much Philip Marlowe. But The Big Sleep arrived fully formed. It was the first Philip Marlowe novel. There were no precursors. Like when he arrives at that doorbell, presses the door, and he's describing his suit and his socks with the little clocks on them and everything. He's fully formed. He just seems to just walk out of the page perfectly formed, and he goes in to meet the general. And when he gave the book to his publisher, the publishers were called Knopf. He knew this is an amazing book, and he took out an advert in the paper. It said something like in 1935 or whatever, or 31, there was Dashiell Hammett. In 35, there was James N. Cain. In 1939, there's Raymond Chandler. So they're kind of announcing, we've got our next big hitter here. And as someone said, the problem with the format is it kind of looked like a tombstone with the dates beside it, and it also sort of shackled Chandler as a crime writer. That's what he's going to do. He's going to write crime, and we were just talking beforehand. You were saying about that he leaned into the crime writing, which he did, but I think because he was sort of brought up in rarefied, school in London, and because he loved literature and all that. He was one of those writers who always thought that he was one day he was going to break away from Marlowe and write a really important book, write that great novel, not realizing that he was doing that all the time. That
he'd already done it, yeah.
Fantastic, So So yeah, so then they wrote the book, and it became a hot property. And so
Well,
when
speaking of
Howard
being a
Hawks-
hot property, there's a 30-second clip from the trailer, which Warner Brothers, for whatever reason, will allow to be played on YouTube. So
Okay.
here's a great little introduction of the novel for the trailer for The Big Sleep.
Okay.
Can I help you, sir?
Oh, yeah, I'm looking for a good mystery on something off the beaten track, like the Maltese Falcon.
Oh, that was a fascinating story. But here's one that has everything the Falcon had and more. It's Raymond Chandler's latest bestseller, The Big Sleep. And what a picture that'll make.
You mind if I look at it?
And I try to do the entire trailer, but the Max Steiner score just sets off so many alarm bells. And even though it's playing in the background there, it's the big orchestral, booming, thunderous Max Steiner notes that YouTube will not allow me to include. But at least I could get a little snippet. I love the hook of that trailer. And then it goes into Marlon Brando, Humphrey Bogart reading the text of the book as they show clips from the movie. And it's a fantastic trailer.
Yeah, what a picture that will make. I love that. It's so creative in terms of a trailer. Obviously, none of that footage is from they just went out and did it. This would be a fun way to link the book, and he's reading it, and he does that thing where he's kind of reading out loud, which he does in the film The Big Sleep when someone hands him a card, and it'd be like rare books. You can hear him in the background, but yeah, so the book was kind of like this. Someone gave me an ex of mine very kindly gave me this years ago. It is the original Hamish Hamilton. It's a reprint. Obviously, it was the original, be worth thousands. But the book was published and was a massive, big success and has never ever been out of print. I should say I've got a few of them here. This is Penguin from kind of like 60s. Then they reprinted it. Penguin again from the 60s for a while. Then they started doing these covers which were photographs, so they'd a gun and this and that. They thought that was obviously cheaper. Then got to mid 60s, got a bit arty there,
Very
with
nice.
the old eyepiece and all that. Then there's a whole series like this where they use actual stills. They just take them from The Big Sleep. They
Totally.
obviously discuss it. The movie is it keeps getting rediscovered by new generations of people, and they obviously said, well, we can do these acetate drawings of them. There's the long goodbye, but it's still got a still from The Big Sleep on it, which is kind of funny. And then there's playback, and it's got another still from The Big Sleep. So they really went to town on that. And then when I was in college in the 90s, Penguin re-released them again, and these were what the covers look like. They're kind of funky. They're probably not really that nice, but they're the ones these are the ones I would have gone in to the shop and bought sometime around the mid 90s. There's another one there. They're again in. There's this one here. I always thought that looks a bit like Madonna. Anyway, so yeah, they were all the ones in the 90s. Then they reissued The Big Sleep in the 2000s like that. And if you go into a bookstore now and buy it, they've got this beautiful black and white image of a girl looking out. It's very cool, very
for
stylish.
me, I just have a little martini glass, so yeah, but decent cover.
Nice too. A martini is nice, it's good pre-dinner drink. But just what I was saying is, it's so insanely popular. Like, it's never been out of print. Like everyone. I was watching Quentin Tarantino was talking about when he was in college. Like, The Big Sleep would be really popular amongst college dropouts or whatever. They'd have revival houses would show it, and I remember that when I was in college. Like, there were VHSs of The Big Sleep going around. Like, it's not. It's just an incredibly popular movie, considering it was completely untroubled by any awards. It wasn't nominated in any category in the Oscars. None of the actors were nominated for Academy Awards. None of the technicians were nominated. It's
a great flick for young people. I think the fact that Bogey's so insolent, I think young people like just how insolent he is throughout. And people keep calling attention to the fact that he's so insolent throughout the movie. Here's a great clip where he brings Carmen home, and Lauren Bacall or Vivian accuses him of having done something to her. But here's a little moment which defines his insolence.
Did you do this?
That? Oh, yes, that's a little special service I always provide all my clients.
Including being insolent.
But no one's ever been more insolent than Bogie. But yeah, when I was in college, I had this poster on my wall, and my roommates and I, we just we ate it up. And some of my roommates were more into old movies than I was. But when I got bitten by the classic movie bug, The Big Sleep was a big part of that. Where I just Howard Hawks was one of my gateway drugs, and so yeah, one of the first kind of reprints of an old poster that I bought was this bad boy, and I might have to use this as a thumbnail for our YouTube videos. So smile big, just in case I end up doing a screen grab from this. But yeah, all the posters for this movie are absolutely gorgeous, and there've been a bunch of different variations in different territories. But yeah, they just they knocked it all out of the park. But I love how it just keeps getting rediscovered by different generations for different reasons. But if you have sexiness and humor and violence and sparkling dialogue and a kind of a tight economical visual style, well then yeah, there's really nothing to criticize.
Yeah, I've got, as I said, I'll send you a picture. I've got the Big Sleep poster on my wall there, which is unusual. I mean, there are loads of different versions. That one just has Lauren Bacall. No one else has just got her. So, and underneath it, it says sultry, sophisticated. 3 S's. I can't read the other one here without my spectacles on. But it's gorgeous. Like the whole artwork that goes with them. I think the one in the original US cover of the book has a skull or something on it, to symbolize death. But yeah, there's such a cool look that goes with the whole sale of the posters and everything. I love it.
Yeah, I don't know at what point they figured this out, but obviously we'll get into this in a bit. But they chose to reshoot big chunks of this movie to really place heavier emphasis on Bogie and Bacall, who obviously had exploded into popularity with To Have and Have Not. Bogie was obviously already a big star from like High Sierra and Maltese Falcon and Casablanca and movies like that. But the Bogie-Bacall combo was irresistible. And they very wisely said, you know what, let's go back and let's get rid of a few scenes that are expository and explain the plot, and we'll add in a few scenes that are just nothing but double entendres and flirtations and so on and so forth. But that Bogie-Bacall chemistry is impossible to deny, and it's what keeps. I think it's a huge part of the draw. Even like the opening title sequence, just the fact they're lighting cigarettes. It's so hot. It's so sexy. I couldn't include the clip because the Max Steiner score is blasting over it, and YouTube freaked out. But like as soon as people saw the silhouettes, they're like, "Oh, we know exactly who these people are." And then, of course, there's nothing more erotic than placing the 2 cigarettes side by side in the ashtray. It's like, oh, I wonder what that's supposed to symbolize. So, yeah, just the audience was primed and ready for a big Bogie-Bacall vehicle. And yeah, I'm always torn between this and To Have and Have Not. Like I enjoy Dark Passage. And I enjoy Key Largo, but The Big Sleep and To Have and Have Not, that is the Bogie-Bacall chemistry that everybody is craving.
Yeah, I read that it was Lauren Bacall's agent who...
Charlie Feldman, I think his name was?
Yeah, he was the main driving force behind it, because some of the scenes are new, but some of them are just the previous scenes from the 45 version sexed up a bit. As I mentioned to you, I'd never seen it. So if people don't know, the film was finished in 1945 and they sent it out to, they would send them out to the forces because they needed entertainment. And they're like, you got this perfect test screener audience, like just show it to people who are starved of entertainment. And they loved the movie, and it's a great movie. And had it been released in 1945, it would still be a great movie and people would like it. But Lauren Bacall's agent wrote a letter to Jack Warner and said that they needed to reconsider. And since making The Big Sleep, she was in a movie called Confidential Agent,
which bombed.
Which bombed. I haven't seen it because there's an Orson Welles novel and film. It sounds very similar.
Confidential Report. Yeah,
Confidential Report.
Mr. Akkadin.
Yeah, Mr. Akkadin. Yeah, because I remember I bought the book years ago. But anyway, it's not that. But the film didn't do very well, and because her career could be over before she started. So he said, "Look, you need to lean into this sexiness. The public don't care what's going on in the movie." I saw a clip last week online. It's an interview. Leonardo DiCaprio had said that Martin Scorsese doesn't care about plot. He's not interested in plot. What he's interested in is, getting people into these scenarios and
emotion and style.
Yeah, and all that sort of thing. And it's never more obviously true. Of course, plot is important, and plot is more important in a detective novel than anything else. But it's, not at the expense of entertainment or making people excited. And Big Sleep is the ultimate example of that.
Every time I watch the movie, I'm like, all right, this time I'm going to follow the plot very carefully. But there's always a moment where I'm like, I've lost it. It slipped through my fingers, because there's just a point where you're carried away by the emotion and the style. But somebody very accurately described The Big Sleep as like this incredible romance that's surrounded by all this danger and darkness. But there's something about the impenetrable plot that enhances this feeling of, like, Marla and Vivian falling in love. But when you're going back to Bacall and her persona, it was very wise for them to go back and lean into, she's also equally insolent as Bogie in a lot of these early movies, but really understanding what was the appeal of her screen persona and to have and have not, and trying to recreate more of those kinds of scenes. And I've got some words from Hawks himself on Bacall's persona and why it was so effective.
When Bacall fell in love with Bogart, and he with her, and she told me about it, I said, I'll tell you one thing. I wouldn't be surprised if he wasn't in love with the girl in the scenario. And if I were you, and if you're smart, and if you love him, you better keep on acting this way all the time. And every time I meet her, she says, I'm still doing the same thing. And it's become part of her thinking. And she is like that. That's what made her great.
What Hawks does not include in that little excerpt is that for years he tried to torpedo the relationship because he had her under contract before he sold the contract to Warner Brothers. But I always suspect that Howard Hawks was very bitterly jealous that Bogie and Bacall fell in love, as opposed to Hawks and Bacall falling in love. However, Hawks did carry on an affair with the actress who plays Carmen in this, so he got to have some fun as well. But yeah, he tried so hard he even got his wife Slim, that he was always cheating on, to try to convince Lauren Bacall to like start dating Clark Gable instead. And she's like, no, I like Bogart. In any case, Hawks, even though I love and admire and respect him in so many ways, he will never sacrifice a good story for the sake of the truth. And so he is always kind of spinning yarns and creating these narratives and that sort of thing. And it's always good to kind of look at his stories a little bit suspiciously, but he is a superb storyteller, whether he's lying or telling the truth or a bit of both.
Yeah, I'm going back to like with Bacall in redoing all those scenes, because I'd never seen the movie before, so I watched the 45 cut there 2 nights ago, and it's good. But I didn't know online they call it the Vicar's cut. That's what it's called. It's called the Vicar's cut because it doesn't even have, because it has slightly more prominence to Carmen, and I have heard that part of the reason that they went back and lent into all of that stuff,
Vickers was outshining Bacall.
Yeah, so that they would, like, one, it would put Lauren Bacall more to the forefront, and two, they could edit out a few of the scenes or cut or trim a few of the scenes where Carmen was being an absolute star and slaying it and sort of threatening to blow Betty Bacall off the screen because she was so insanely hot.
I couldn't include the clip where she tries to sit down in his lap while he's still standing up, but this is a publicity still, which I'm allowed to use. And apparently she struggled after this movie, and Hawks was like, well, why don't you just go back to playing parts like you did in The Big Sleep? She's like, yeah, but she's a nymphomaniac. He's like, well, that's not so bad. She was trying to get away from the nymphomaniac persona, but unsuccessfully. And Hawks gave her some very tough talking to about why she was so popular in this. And also for people who want to see more of this incredible character, there are 2 scenes in this movie where she is naked as the day she was born. Obviously, you need to let your imagination do the work, and Raymond Chandler does a great job of helping to flesh out her appearance. But when she's first found in the book, it says she was wearing a pair of long jade earrings, or this is when he finds her after the shooting. They were nice earrings, and it probably cost a couple $100. She wasn't wearing anything else. She had a beautiful body, small, lithe, compact, firm, rounded. Her skin in the lamplight had the shimmering luster of a pearl. Her legs didn't quite have the raffish grace of Miss Regan's legs, but they were very nice. And anyway, it goes on and on and on. Anyway, so if you want a little skin in the big sleep, the book is waiting for you to be discovered. Yeah.
And
of course, her sister at one point, it's like, well, if you like her body, you should see mine. And anyway, there's a lot of the movie, if anything, enhances the more flirtatious aspects because every single girl in this movie flirts with Marlowe, but the book delivers on the actual skin.
Yeah, it does. And I noticed there that he says Miss Regan because in the book it is Vivian who's married to Sean Rusty Regan, and because I'm like you, I try and follow the plot, but I'm always there going, no, Mrs. Rutledge, who the fuck is Rutledge, and where's Mr. Rutledge? He never appears. Like, so in the script version, she's been married to a guy called Rutledge. It didn't take, as they say, and now she is living back with Dad. But on the sort of famous story that nobody knew what was going on, and that early on, obviously lots of spoilers because it's a really 80-year-old movie, but the chauffeur Owen Taylor is killed and Marlowe's brought out.
Who killed Owen Taylor? People still debating it.
Taylor? What's your take on Cassavetes? Who killed Owen Taylor? Yeah, it's a mystery to me.
Mystery to Chandler. It's a mystery to everybody.
Chandler, and they were apparently famously on the set so he had Faulkner and Leigh Brackett, and then he had Jules Firthman as his sort of on-set writer. So they would do a lot of the improv and scribbling it together there. Obviously, they wouldn't have Faulkner
and
there.
Firthman was Hawks's regular writer in the late 30s and early 40s. But obviously Brackett and Faulkner had been alternating chapters early on. But famously, they're on the set, and they couldn't figure out who had killed Owen Taylor. So they sent a telegram to Chandler.
They telegrammed him, yeah. And he wrote back, "I don't know." Which is kind of funny because, again, and people think this is a gotcha, and I was like, I don't really think that Raymond Chandler didn't know who killed Owen Taylor, although in a letter because he was a prodigious letter writer, I have a book of his there, Raymond Chandler Speaking, which is all his letters, which are hilarious and very funny, and he's writing to people like Groucho Marx, and he's writing to various publishers and all that sort of thing, but he tells the story. They called me up, and I didn't know. I think that was his sort of after dinner speech thing. I think he was a mystery writer. He would agonize over the plots of his movies. I don't think he didn't know who did it.
Yeah, and the story's become so famous, it's helped enhance the reputation of the movie.
It propels him along, and also telegrams were expensive. You paid by the word. It's easier to say I don't know than get into the whole.
And Jack Warner was famously a cheapskate and would get mad when they would send telegrams like, "Oh, who's charging these telegrams to the production?" and blah blah blah. Like he was barred from the set, but when he'd heard about them taking their time, kind of fooling around, he famously wrote him memos like, "Apparently, you're having fun making the movie. This must stop," and things like that. But anyway, he was not a fan of people sending telegrams willy-nilly on his dime.
Yeah, but also on that, I think it's important to say that Chandler was, it's not important, but I'm going to say it anyway, is that Chandler wrote a fantastic essay called The Simple Art of Murder, in which he kind of describes what he was doing. And he felt very much, I think, that the Americans took back crime literature from the Agatha Christie's that were around in the 20s and 30s, and he said he wanted to give murder back to the people who did it. If
I love Agatha Christie, but it's a lot of kind of upper crust, dignified people plotting and scheming against each other, and in between glasses of sherry. Whereas in Chandler, it's guys like Harry Jones being force-fed poison by scumbags and things like that.
Yeah. That's a great scene when with Canino, the scary bastard. But just on that, the other thing is that the Agatha Christie, when they're having the cucumber sandwiches and it's Colonel Mustard in the pantry with the candlestick, there's always a denouement where everyone gathers in the drawing room, and Hercule Poirot will say, and
explain the plot.
And everything's neatly arranged, but that's not what happens in real life. And maybe Owen Taylor's murder solving is part of that, because people die. Like, it's in LA, people go missing, they kill themselves, they gamble away all their money, and they run off into the desert, and and these things are never resolved. Like, Chandler had sort of open wounds. He never met his father again. The man never re-entered his life after he became famous. And Raymond Chandler had created the most famous detective of all time. He could have tracked him down if he wanted to, but he had no interest.
Although some Brits might push back and say, "What are you talking about? Sherlock Holmes is the most famous detective of all time." But
this is true. They may, well, I mean, I think it would be a good double. It would be a good argument who is the more famous. But yeah, I can imagine a lot of people would say Sherlock Holmes possibly is more famous. So
people still say, "No shit, Sherlock." Whenever anytime someone says something obvious, or I hope they do.
Yeah, no, they still do. I actually heard a couple of like teenage kids going by my window there the other day, and one of them said, "No shit, Sherlock," and I was like, "Does this guy even know?"
Yeah, I was saying that for years before I even knew that Sherlock Holmes was an actual character. Yeah. I just thought it was a clever phrase.
Okay, well, maybe it's the second most famous detective, or maybe throw Sam Spade in there. But anyway, it's a pretty famous character. But the more salient point is that life is a big, horrible, ugly, messy business, and it can't always be tidied up, and it can't always be resolved by the detective in the end. Marlowe's job is not to solve the crime, although he usually does. His more important job is to protect his client, to get them out the other end, so they survive.
You feel that in every single page of the book, where his first and primary concern, even if he will work with the law, and he'll even in the 1945 cut of the film, which you saw, he has that big scene with the DA where he basically explains the whole plot, and that scene was famously cut. And I saw that print, or I saw that cut at the Virginia Film Festival, neither 97 or 98. But anyway, they had restored and preserved that version. But if you want to understand just the plot of The Big Sleep, watch that original cut. But the far more romantic, kind of lush, entertaining version is the 1946. But in any case, he will always look after his clients first and foremost, and you feel that in the movie. You feel that in the book. And speaking of his clients, here is the actual client who hires Philip Marlowe in the first scene of the book and brings him on board. But what are you about to say before I play the clip?
No, I know. Sorry, I wasn't going to say anything there. I was just settling into watch this great clip.
Yeah. All right. So here's General Sternwood.
I was just gonna stroke my ear there because I just.
I've got that as well. So
yeah.
So here's the famous ear gesture, which is in the book, as well as Humphrey Bogart does it so well.
About a year ago, I paid a man named Joe Brody $5,000 to let my younger daughter alone. What does that mean?
Means,
And there's a slight change from the text, but that scene actually is in the book. But here's the bit of text which I really love, where you really get an appreciation for Raymond Chandler's astonishing dialogue that was very accurately adapted by Leigh Brackett and William Faulkner. Here we go.
Nice state of affairs when a man has to indulge his vices by proxy. You're looking, sir, at a very dull survival of a very gaudy life. Crippled, paralyzed in both legs. Very little I can eat, and my sleep is so near waking that it's hardly worth the name. I seem to exist largely on heat, like a newborn spider.
And what's interesting is how, if you read the Todd McCarthy, history of events, early on in the production, Howard Hawks was all about fidelity to the novel and adhering to the text. And Faulkner and Leigh Brackett, Faulkner came up with the idea of just doing every other chapter, which is such a bizarre way to do it. He's like, you do the odd chapters, I'll do the even chapters. And they were just turning him into Hawks. But on the set, it was oftentimes Jules Furthman who was helping put the final kind of finishing touches, because Howard Hawks loved to rewrite on the set. And my favorite pictures of all of Howard Hawks' productions are always of him surrounded by the cast and his writers, looking at the script, rehearsing the dialogue. He loved going over the script and rewriting on the set. And so as the production went on, it started to drift away from the novel. And then when they got back together to do the reshoots for the final cut of the movie, one of the writers from Casablanca, who's uncredited, I think his name, I can't remember, where the hell is his name? I got it written down somewhere. In any case, but so there were further departures from the text. But early on, Hawks did try to actually do justice to the book. And you can feel that, and like just scene after scene after scene, just ripping the best lines straight from the book. But what should we say about Leigh Brackett and William Faulkner? Because William Faulkner, obviously, legendary novelist, his only 2 screen credits, even though he did a lot of ghostwriting, his only 2 screen credits are on Howard Hawks Productions, which always made him very proud. But I had to dust off my old William Faulkner collection from my undergrad days, and the only one in here which I've not read is As I Lay Dying, which I keep intending to read. But Faulkner, like Chandler, was fond of drink, and but I feel like if Howard Hawks is known for anything, all these years later, he had great respect for great writers, whether it's great screenwriters or great novelists or a bit of both. But the fact that he was able to bring in Faulkner and also Leigh Brackett, he thought Leigh Brackett was a man when she showed up for the job interview. He was kind of caught off guard by this, kind of a prim and proper young lady from Pasadena, but they shared the same taste in literature. They had the same taste in books. And not only did she work on this movie, she worked on movies like Rio Bravo. And then later on, she would help write a little known movie called The Empire Strikes Back. But her career really got started when Howard Hawks brought her on board for $125 a week to work on this movie. And she said she would have done it for free.
Yeah, I mean, the similar thing happened to Brackett, happened to Chandler himself. It's kind of funny the way it all comes around. When they were going to write Double Indemnity, Billy Wilder said, let's get that guy Chandler, who's just got these really amazing crime books that are out at the moment, but he'd never seen a picture of him, and he sort of presumed that he would be a gumshoe, walk into the room in a dirty Macintosh coat. But Chandler came in, and he was sort of in this stage in his early 50s and quite bookish looking, and his glasses and all that. But yeah, I read that Leigh Brackett, she was one of the few sort of female hard-boiled writers. The other one was Dorothy B. Hughes that we did an episode on, and a fantastic writer. And Leigh Brackett released, I can't remember the name of her novel, but
it is called, I got it written, No Good for a Corpse.
No Good for a Corpse. And Hawks read that and said, well, this is great. This is really like tough. It's in that sort of Chandler-esque style, and hired her thinking that Leigh had that suitably gender non-specific name. And it's great. And I heard as well that because Chandler didn't like working in the studio a lot, and Chandler didn't work on the screenplay of any of his movies for various reasons. Like, one was because he was under contract to Paramount, and this is Warner Brothers or whatever.
If this is a Warner Brothers film, and back then you'd have to pay the other studio a fee to borrow their actors or borrow their writers.
And Chandler was getting paid really well. We talked about this before. He was getting paid like he milked Hollywood for a couple of years, and then he just took the money and ran. And like all good writers, he got revenge by putting the film director character in The Long Goodbye, and using things that he picked up along the way to get his revenge on Hollywood. But he didn't like to work in the studio a lot in these little cottages, and he said, I've got to work from home. And apparently William Faulkner said the same thing. He said, "Oh yeah, I work from home," and flew to
Mississippi. I work at home. Yeah, Hawks didn't realize he was going back to the deep South where he could drink, rye whiskey or corn whiskey and just hang out
and be uncontactable.
Howard Hawks said one of his favorite phone calls he ever received in his life was Faulkner called him. And he's like, "Do you hear that in the background?" Hawks like, "What?" And he's like, "It's indoor plumbing. I just flushed the toilet. I'm the first member of my family to have indoor plumbing." Like, so that was a big moment of change for the Faulkners when he got to, instead of using an outhouse, got to actually install a toilet with some of the money he made working on Hawks's movies. And also, he was famous for being able to write really quickly. Like, there's a movie called Air Force, which Howard Hawks made during World War II. And there's a famous death scene in the movie, and he's like, he needed somebody to punch up the death scene. And so Faulkner, like in 5 minutes, wrote several pages where the person who's dying is giving commands to his crew as like the command you would give while taking off. But it's such a beautifully written, poetic scene where this guy is quite literally like moving into the afterlife, but they're using the metaphor of a plane taking off. And Faulkner just cranked it out. And like for him, it was just no big deal. It was so disposable. He got very well paid, and then he could get back to writing Absalom, or Go Down Moses, or, The Sound and the Fury, or any of the other amazing novels that he wrote in the 30s and 40s.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone's ever seen Barton Fink, I mean, that seems to me really like the Faulkner character, and that you know,
Yeah,
that's
vomiting in the toilet when Barton
Yeah.
first meets him.
Yeah.
He's like, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And he comes out, kind of straightens his bow tie and
Yeah.
Looking all dignified. That
Yeah.
character is incredible in Barton Fink.
Don't judge us, Barton. Yeah, but that scene you showed in the greenhouse, I mean, it's such amazing writing, but because it's kind of the opening scene where you meet Marlowe in the opening scene of the opening book. And what I mean is fully formed is the writing is so amazing. He asks him, "How do you like your brandy?" And Bogart says, "In a glass."
Yeah.
Like, yeah, this isn't a man who's gonna, and it's not a case not mincing words or not.
Sternwood prefers his with a little champagne. He's more, more wealthy, whatnot.
Yeah, and then he notices the orchids that are in the greenhouse, and the colonel asks him, "Does he like orchids?" And he says, "Not particularly." Like, you're there for a job, you would say, "Yeah, they're nice. I like orchids." Who the fuck doesn't like orchids? They're lovely, you know. But Marlowe being Marlowe, he because being a man of such integrity, he just goes, "Not particularly." And then the colonel goes into a spiel and goes, "Yes, their flesh is too much like the flesh of men. They have the rotten stench of corruption." And you're like, okay, it's going to be one of those sort of stories. It's it's just elevated stuff.
Maybe now's as good a time as any to talk about Sternwood's fascination with the Irish Revolution and how betrayed he felt when Sean Regan pulled a disappearing act.
Yeah, I was thinking, like, my mini sort of Freudian theory is that it's his first book and Chandler's first book, and the entire consternation is, again, spoiler alert, Sean Regan. He's not hired to find Sean Regan in the film anyway. He's hired because of these gambling debts. He's, as the colonel says, "I'm being blackmailed again." It's kind of funny, obviously an occupational hazard of being a rich old man, but he implores him to find Sean Regan. That's his mission in the first book, in the first chapter of the book. Find Sean Regan. You could call the book "Find Sean Regan," but Marlowe never finds Sean Regan. Why not? Well, one, because Sean Regan is dead, but also because in the more I don't know, metaphysical world, because sometimes you don't find people that walk out on you, and like there has that touching scene, like when Vivian brings him up, you can kind of hear almost, I mean, this is me, I can't because I'm just putting words in his mouth, but she says that it wasn't right, Sean, walking off like that, broke Dad's heart, although he won't say anything about it. So, he's kind of saying it's not right to just walk out on your family. You're breaking people's hearts. You're causing all this chaos. But that's just the way it is. That's just the way the world is, So I think that if the ghost...
Although in the novel, we do finally learn the final fate of Sean Regan. And it was quite scandalous.
Well, he was dumped in an oil sump, which again, I think that's Chandler raking through his biography and also getting a bit of revenge, because obviously he was fired from the Dabney Oil Company. So what's he going to do with his dead dad, or with his sort of, metaphorical Oedipal character, but dump him in a disused oil sump? It seems like quite poetic that he would take two strands of his life and, have a little chuckle to himself about how he ends up, and so a lot of people have also speculated as another quote, a quote from the book that actually references the title and and what happens to Sean Rusty Regan towards the end, when he says, because obviously the big sleep is death. You're sleeping the big sleep when you're dead. And Marlowe says, "What did it matter where you lay once you were dead, in a dirty sump or in a marble tower on the top of a high hill? You were dead. You were sleeping the big sleep. You were not bothered by things like that. Oil and water were the same as wind and air to you. You just slept the big sleep, not caring about the nastiness of how you died and where you fell." And that is quite existential stuff. And you can really see how the French read this and went, "Oh, we like this."
Oh, yeah.
You can imagine how he was sort of rediscovered. People thought, "Oh, that's a novel." Yeah, they made that into a gangster movie. And then they would get the roman translated into French and read it and think, "Yeah, this is deep stuff."
Some might even argue that it was improved by being translated into French. But as somebody from Ireland, What would you hypothesize Sean Regan's role was in the Irish Revolution? Because the movies, I can't remember if the movie's vague. I can't remember if the novel goes into greater detail, but Stern was fascinated by these stories, which for him would be relatively recent history. I mean, the book came out in 1939, Irish Revolution was, like, you know, still in the back of a lot of people's mind as like current events. But what would you, if you were to do some theory crafting, what did Sean Regan do during the Irish Revolution?
Well, I'm nothing if not wildly speculating with no evidence whatsoever. But and I did dig into it because I mean, one reading is that essentially Sean Regan is Maurice Chandler. Like, he's just this ephemeral figure in the background who causes chaos, who can't be found. But I mean, I always think in a normal archetypal plot, because we were talking about plot and what's important. If someone takes out a gun in a movie, you kind of have to use it in the last reel of the movie. And if someone makes all this fuss and hoo-ha about a character called Sean Regan, then in a normal or maybe a more conventional narrative, in the last 10 minutes, Philip Marlowe would walk into a room and a match would light. And someone would go, Philip Marlowe would look at him, and you'd see a bit of recognition. You go, "Hello, Sean," and he'd go,
"Hey, Rusty." Yeah.
Hello, Phil. And they would just chat, and everything would get tied up. But it never happens in the Philip Marlowe book because the world is messy, and that's the way it goes. But I was saying in 1924, this guy called Dan Breen released a book called My Fight for Irish Freedom, and it would have been 24, and Chandler possibly read it, and it became like, I don't have that one, but I have this one, which is Guerrilla Days in Ireland by Tom Barry, which is another famous one about a guy who had a flying column in North Tip. And so there were a lot of these guys who would be relevant to the time period. And some people think, I wrote this down, some people think that Regan is based on a character called George Brent, who was actually born George Nolan, and he changed his name to Brent, which is interesting. It kind of almost anglicized it a little bit. A lot of these guys left Ireland in the so obviously with the 1916 revolution. Then we had the War of Independence from sort of 20 to 21, and then in 21, 22, you have in 21, you have Michael Collins going to London to negotiate a treaty with the English, and then bringing the treaty back to Ireland, part of the treaty saying that the 6 counties in Northern Ireland will remain part of the United Kingdom and Great Britain, and a few other things, that you have to take an oath of allegiance to the crown. And you had the sort of pragmatists, the Michael Collins side, saying, look, we've been fighting for freedom for 800 years, and this is as good as it gets, and it's one step on the way to full, independence. And then you have the hardliners who are like, absolutely not, we're not abandoning the North, or we're not doing, it's all or nothing. And obviously the pragmatists won, because the 26 county Irish Republic came into existence. Then there was a civil war, the irregulars against the regulars, the people who wouldn't accept the treaty. So then the Civil War was in many ways much bloodier than the war against the English for independence. Proper, brother against brother. In The Wind That Shakes the Barley example.
Incredible movie.
Yeah. So a lot of these
and
guys,
way darker than I was expecting. The poster's so beautiful and kind of lyrical. It's like, oh, the wind that shakes the barley. Like, what's this about? And I was like, oh, Civil War. It's savage.
Yeah. So a lot of those guys then there was a really bloody aftermath, brother set against brother, and a lot of the irregulars left Ireland, I read, and they went to America, and a lot of them got jobs in Hollywood. They got jobs, because they were like tough guys. They were, they got jobs as stuntmen, and what's his name? This particular character, George Nolan, because in The Big Sleep, Chandler, like Rusty Regan, is described as a big curly-headed Irishman from Clonmel, which is in Tipperary, and that's apparently where George Nolan, who became George Brent, was from. And he was a real life IRA guy. He worked as a courier for Michael Collins in the War of Independence, I guess, so he would have been on the pro-treaty side. But he was wanted by the Black and Tans. Brent fled to America in the 1920s and became a major Warner Brothers leading man. So he would have met him around the place, and he's brawny and charming and a notorious Hollywood heartthrob. So it's quite possible that Chandler, mixing with all these sort of ex-IRA Liggers, gun runners, and whatever in the 1920s, made a composite character, obviously, of Sean Rusty Regan. And think, so the character comes from all those ex-IRA who were swilling around the time, but the sort of the reason for the character, I think, is more just for him to state in his first book that some people just walk out of your life never to return again, and there's nothing you can do about it, and all the chaos and mystery. And one of the other things in Tom Heine's biography, which is quite interesting, is that when Chandler signed up to the Canadian Expeditionary Force back in the First World War, they still have the original form that he signed, and he was paying his mother $60 a month out of his wages, because he was a journalist at that stage or whatever. And then he had to write on the form whether his father was alive or not. And it's in Chandler's handwriting. It says, "I don't know," 3 words. Like, so he is kind of quite poignant looking at it all these years later. The other thing, completely kind of unrelated, but that I thought, another thing that attracts me to the character is that when the Second World War broke out, obviously when this movie was being made, like, part of the reason it was delayed from 44, 45, 46 was the war, and they had all this backlog of movies that they were trying to get
They had all the
through.
propaganda films, and Warner Brothers like, the war might end. We got to get the propaganda films onto the screen. The Big Sleep will keep.
Exactly.
But it's why you see like female cab drivers
evergreen
in the movie and that sort of thing, because there were a lot of girls that were occupying those roles during the war. And of course, it gives you yet another opportunity to have a beautiful girl flirting with Philip Marlowe.
Yeah, that makes the movie evergreen. But Chandler tried to enlist at this time. This time, he was in his early 50s.
Old and fat,
Old and fat, and, very unhealthy, half blind. But I thought it was quite poignant that he didn't think the war was going well, so he brought himself down to his local draft office to enlist. And
it's like, I'm going to turn the tide.
They said, no, you're better off staying here and writing, great books.
Create some entertainment for the soldiers to enjoy.
Yeah, but it's funny. I mean, I love the fact that the taxi driver is hilarious and all these people are hilarious, but it would make it a different. You could argue that the Big Sleep has never been filmed as written. Obviously,
especially the climax. I mean, the climax. Yeah. There's just so many ingredients that you could not include in a movie made in Hollywood under the production code.
Yeah, and the like in the book, I'm sure it's some fat guy in a wife beater, with a cab and like a cigar in his mouth, and that would possibly be more in keeping with the Chandler-esque style of the novel. But it's never been made. Obviously, The Big Sleep has been made twice. Once in a deliriously entertaining Howard Hawks movie, and then the second time by Michael Winner in the 1978 London-based Big Sleep.
He's quite a different director from Hawks. I like Michael Winner as well, but he's the guy who gave us Death Wish and a bunch of other really dark movies.
Yeah, I mean, Winner's Dinners as well. But
he was a food critic in the latter part of his career, a restaurant critic.
He certainly was, and he was, and he that's a whole other tangent. I kind of mentioned that in the little film that I made. Food killed him in the end, and he ate a bad oyster and he was hospitalized, nearly had to have his leg amputated. Well, he always said it was the food fighting back because of all the criticism of all the years, and he basically brought it upon himself. But that's with Oliver Reed as Eddie Mars and everything. And there's so many. It's such a wonderful screenplay. I have a version of it, like I downloaded a version of it. There's another great scene where he goes up to see Eddie Mars, the gambler. I mean, all the dialogue is great. He's like, "Can you get $20,000?" He goes, "Yeah, maybe I can get it." "Where would you get it?" "From Eddie Mars, the gambler." "Oh, that explains why you don't have $20,000. And then when he goes up to see him and he has his meeting, and Eddie Mars says to him, "Oh, take this door here." Brings you out to the back, and he goes, "No, I'll go out with the rest of the suckers." You know,
Yeah, great
Marlon's
line.
infantry. He doesn't take any special privileges. He's an everyman. The detective has to be an everyman. Has to be able to walk just as comfortably in a big casino as in a hovel.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, I'm going to cue a quick 2-minute restroom break. And when we come back, there are a few scenes from the movie that I want to sink our teeth into where I feel like we haven't done justice yet to all the little morsels. But I'm going to cue up my Shadowrun pee break. We'll be back at you in 120 seconds.
Nice.
Alrighty, we have returned. So this is one of those movies where every angle you want to talk about it from can launch 1,000 tangents, but I think we really need to place some special emphasis on the chemistry of Bogie and Bacall. And Bogie famously was going through a pretty nasty divorce, or debating about whether or not to go through with the divorce, or what was going to be the future of his life with Bacall or his ex-wife. And he was drinking very heavily, but somehow, in spite of all the chaos in his personal life, a really good movie got made. But when it first got underway, Bacall was very nervous because she and Bogie were not technically together during the early part of the shoot. But by the time you get to the reshoots, they're married. And so you get a very different kind of dynamic. But one of my favorite bits or favorite exchanges between them comes straight out of the book when she's criticizing him for his manners. So I have a juicy little clip, and I'm going to let it rip right now.
But I don't like your manners.
Well, I'm not crazy about yours. I didn't ask to see you. I don't mind if you don't like my manners. I don't like them myself. They're pretty bad. I grieve over them long winter evenings, and I don't mind you ritzing me or drinking your lunch out of a bottle. But don't waste your time trying to cross-examine me.
People don't talk to me like that.
Oh.
I mean, only Bogie. I mean, there are very few leading men where you can start and end every single scene with the same character and you never get sick of them. It's impossible to get sick of Bogie, and this is Bogie. And this is when he's like Bogie on steroids. It's one of his finest Bogie performances. Even though he basically played Bogie in almost every movie.
Yeah, it's peak. I mean, it's a shame they didn't make, Farewell My Lovely with him a year later, and then go on to The High Window and The Little Sister and all that. But the movies were coming out as the books were being written. It's only looking back now that you can see that. It was strange that they only made one, but obviously, Hawks with them moving on to do different things.
Yeah,
Bogart
Red
would-
River was right around the corner.
exactly. Bogart would never be in a series of movies. He wasn't about to come, James Bond in a fedora. But
Although
yeah,
I mean, Sam Spade and Philip Marlowe, I feel like he did justice to this genre.
yeah, he's so cool in this movie, and he's pretty lithe, pretty slim. There's a bit of bit of action business. He kicks some guy in the face, and
Yeah.
what he gets when he gets the crap beaten out of him quite viciously, like lots of kidney punches, and in the seedy dark alley, and the guy picks him up and puts him on the bin. That's so film noir. It's amazing. But some great lines he has in the movie that he delivers with such sincerity is somebody says, you keep some pretty strange company or something. And oh no, he says that to Jonesy, and Jonesy says, I take them as they come. I love that line. It's just like, the doors open, you come in, and that character you have, Harry Jones, when he comes in to sell Bogart some information, and he gets really indignant that
You're waving cops at me. Yeah.
I come one right guy to another right guy, and you start waving, and you should be ashamed of yourself. And Bogart says, I am. I've been hanging around with the wrong people. I've obviously been with too many toffee-nosed upper-class types when I should be down here on the streets. But
that's when you're in the hands of great writers, when they are unafraid to give some of the best lines to the supporting cast. It's like far too many movies only have like one or two good lines in the entire movie, so of course they're going to give it to the star. But in this movie, you have this astonishing ensemble cast where you're just surrounded by all these colorful characters, all of whom have great lines, many times coming straight out of Raymond Chandler's book. Like there's this great bit where it almost sounds like a comedy that you like something you would hear out of like Airplane when they're talking about making something your business. But I checked, it came straight from the text, but it's 7 seconds, but it always makes you howl.
By the way, how'd you happen to have one?
Is that any of your business?
I could make it my business.
I can make your business mine.
Oh, you wouldn't like it. The pay's too small.
It's so quick and so snappy. Some of these scenes could almost be in His Girl Friday. And Hawks had made a lot of comedies before His Girl Friday, but it was with His Girl Friday that he really honed and perfected his style of snappy, crackling dialogue, oftentimes overlapping dialogue, delivered at an insanely brisk pace. But he still had that training, and he carried it over into The Big Sleep. And there's just one hilarious exchange after another. But that timing, you can only get there after you've practiced with 20th Century and Bringing Up Baby and His Girl Friday and all these sparkling comedies that led up to The Big Sleep.
Absolutely. There's the line just before that when Eddie Mars says to him, your story didn't sound quite straight. And he says, oh, that's a shame. You got a better one. They just throw it back at each other. But it's also the physical comedy as well from all of those films that you're referencing. Like there are bits that aren't in the book. There's a hilarious one as well where she, it's such a simple, it's like, oh, we'll do that gag, where you ask someone the time and they pour the water out. Like they do the gag where Vivian has made her point and she flounces out and the door won't open properly. It's like they did in the Godfather. They got when they filmed The Godfather 2 and the guy was walking out of the meeting with Robert De Niro, the door always open in the rehearsal, and then when they did the take, he put a nail in the door, so he'd struggle with it. And Vivian, who's just so stylish and elegant, and she can't open the door right. It's happened to us all. She's storming off, and the door pulls in instead of opening out.
And there's always the chance that she drank her lunch and maybe her reflexes aren't entirely there.
That's it. And then she just says, "Try it sometime." Look at things from my point of view. It's just a funny line. It doesn't really make any sense, but it's just everything's delivered. The physical comedy, the two of them are just bantering off each other and making crank calls to the police. And
that scene, it's like, why is this even in here? But it's like they're cashing in on the public's fascination. Like the fact that Bogie and Bacall is like, will they or won't they? Everybody fell in love with them into heaven of not. And they were vaguely aware that Bogart was, I think it was on his third wife at that point. He loved marrying alcoholic actresses. And anyway, she was going in and out of institutions, trying to sober up and that sort of thing. But I think the will they or won't they finally get together was driving this public's fascination with this, ultimate Hollywood power couple. And by the time The Big Sleep came along, the fact that they were already married, the audience was like, yes. And they just wanted to watch them fall in love all over again. And very wisely, they leaned all the way in on like the latter third of the movie. It's basically like her talking about how she's fallen in love with him and that sort of thing. None of which is in here. I mean, they have a few flirtatious moments where she compares her body to her sister's and that sort of thing. But yeah, this is where a classic example of a faithful adaptation of the book may or may not necessarily be a successful Hollywood movie. And we can argue about the merits of the changes or the lack thereof, but no one can deny that this was one of the most popular movies of its time. And when I was looking up the most popular movies of that year, when this movie was out and playing in theaters, the only movie that was more popular was Notorious, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. And I was like, oh my God, what a time to be alive to have Notorious and The Big Sleep as commercial successes in the theater at the same time. And so people didn't appreciate just how good they had it in 1946.
Yeah, unbelievable. The film that won Best Oscar was The Lost Weekend that year. They just have one incredible movie.
You got Wilder, Hitchcock, and Hawks all firing on all cylinders at the same time.
Absolutely, with incredible scripts. I was watching the Vickers cut, and it's weird. They call it the Vickers cut, even though. Because I think Martha Vickers is great. She should have got a nomination. I think Best Supporting Actress would have been fair.
Just for the thumb sucking alone. I guess the censor said she couldn't actually suck on it like in the book, so she just constantly kind of chews on it. So they're kind of dancing around the restriction.
Yeah, it's funny that I'm going to read this because I put it in my article because I dug it up from Tom Heine, puts it in his book, but just when you talk about the censor, so the guy who was like. It goes without saying that this film was banned in Ireland. They had a documentary on it about 2 weeks ago, all about censorship. All about the film censor. But in the 40s and 50s, everything was banned. Life of
Let's
Brian
go
was
The Quiet
banned.
Man. It wasn't getting released.
Yeah, exactly. And the speaking of the IRA, the film censor, Dr. Richard Hayes, was an IRA veteran, and he was out in the revolution in 1916, and then he became a respectable politician and became the Irish film censor. But the censor, when The Big Sleep came out, it's like he's written this disgusted sort of note in his notes on the movie, and it kind of makes it sound like you have to see this film no matter what, just get a print of it. Anyway, Dr. Hayes said, "This is a thoroughly immoral film in the widest sense of the word. Blackmail and murder are mere incidents in it. The entire atmosphere is sordid, and there are many suggestive situations and not a little double-meaning dialogue. Altogether, an unsavory picture for which a certificate will not be granted."
Wow. I mean, that's better than somebody saying this is the most amazing movie I've ever seen. You got to go see it. I'd much rather read like The Righteous Indignation. It's like, all right, that sounds like a movie worth seeing. But yeah,
you read that and you think, I've got to see this movie.
Hell yeah. But it is a very sexually suggestive movie. Howard Hawks was a bit of a womanizer throughout his life, and he loved putting scenes in movies. And one of the, that were of a suggestive nature. And one of his early contributions to the overall tone was every single woman that Marlowe meets is going to fling herself at him, including Dorothy Malone, who was 19 years old at the time. And that could not include the clip. It's still too hot to handle 80 years later. But that scene where it's raining outside and he's watching the bookstore across the street and he's like, oh, well, I got a bottle of pretty good rye in my pocket. They whip out the cups and he looks at her glasses and says, can't we do anything about those? The glasses come off, the hair comes down, and that great toast. He's like, oh, hello. She says, hello. But the way she looks at him and sticks her tongue in the corner of his mouth when he's not looking at her, it's so hot. It's so sexy. And people to this day will post that GIF and it'll get thousands of reposts and that sort of thing. It's an electrifying, erotic scene.
Yeah, that's a fantastic scene. Everything about it, the acting, and Bogart says, oh, she says, oh, it's gonna, it's looks like it's raining pretty hard. He goes, oh, I've got my car around the corner, and then he twigs, oh yeah, it is actually raining pretty hard. Now that you say that, But it's you could imagine why the film censor in Ireland was so outraged by it, because
Aghast.
Aghast. I mean, there's no conclusion to come to other than that they made out.
They have a nice little roll in the hay, waiting out the storm.
And then she says, "Oh, I hate to tell you, but that's the guy you're looking for." They have their they say goodbye, and there's something very affecting. He says, "So long, pal." He's made a new pal. Made a new friend.
No pillow talk, no tender embrace. So long. It's like, we'll play pool tomorrow. Blah blah blah. But she's just one of the fellas.
Yeah.
But that's very Hawksian. The Hawksian women, the women that he was very attracted to, oftentimes were they enjoyed masculine environments. They enjoyed shooting with the guys. They enjoyed hunting with the guys. They enjoyed playing golf and tennis. He liked girls who would wear pants and just would have kind of girls like Leigh Brackett, who helped write this movie. There's a Hawksian ideal that you see at play, and some actresses could pull it off and some actresses could not. But obviously Lauren Bacall is one of your quintessential Hawksian women, and other women like Jean Arthur, who's marvelous in like Frank Capra movies and that sort of thing. She really struggled in Only Angels Have Wings because she couldn't quite understand what he was going for. And years later, after she saw Bacall in this and To Have and Have Not, she was like, I get it now. If you ever need me for something else, like I won't fight you on like the tone and the persona and that sort of thing. But Dorothy Malone, this is early in her career, and she'd go on to do things with people like Douglas Sirk. But she got this incredible opportunity and she just ran with it. But Bacall, she has all these great scenes with like the double entendres, and I couldn't include the full scene, but these scenes were rewritten in between the original cut from 45 and 46. And for a movie that was so heavily censored in terms of all the pornography and murder and whatnot, it's hilarious that this managed to be included in the movie because it's some of the most sexually suggestive stuff I've ever seen in any movie from any era. And so here's a little taste of Bogie and Bacall discussing, basically using like racing metaphors to talk about how they have sex, when they have sex, and who they have sex with.
Well, speaking of horses, I like to play them myself. But I like to see them work out a little first. See if they're front runners or come from behind.
I mean, how many different ways can we interpret the line coming from behind?
Yeah.
And then she's talking about like how whether or not you like to be rated and like taking a break in the back stretch and then coming home free. I mean, the way she's describing it, it is the most erotic, probably the most erotic scene of the 1940s.
Yeah, and she says it depends who's in the saddle.
A lot of that depends on who's in the saddle.
Yeah, and that's a real, because I just watched it the other night, that's a brilliant sort of side by side. So that scene is in the 45 version, but it's night and day. So because the scene has, in the scene, she's arrived the express purpose of paying him off, like saying the job is finished, it's all done,
sugar him off, as he says.
Yeah, well, who told you to sugar me off this job? But in the 45 version, for one, it's kind of boring because, not boring, but it's back in his office, so it's a place we've seen before, and she's waiting outside, and she's got this black veil. I mean, it looks like she's just come from a funeral. It's got a veil with little dots on it. You can barely see her face. It's very, it's very frigid. It's very like emotionless, and she gives him the check and all that. And what they do is they just take the exact same structure, as in you're here to pay him off, but okay, let's make it much more exciting. Put it in a ballroom, glitzy, and there's lots of people around and laughing and drinking.
And look at that outfit. She looks like she just stepped off the set of like a science fiction movie. But yeah, it's like the height of 40s fashion.
Yeah, it's very
no funeral veil there.
No, if you put the two of them side by side, it's chalk and cheese. Yeah, and then they obviously added in all that filth as well, just to make that
the
scene.
Depraved content.
Yeah, with all that talk about.
But it does
horses.
show how like a little bit of a restriction sometimes does lead to incredibly creative solutions for tap dancing around. Like people back then, you could either be an iconoclast and take the system head on, or you could be a bit of like an illusionist, or you could be subtle and try to sneak things through. And sometimes when people did manage to successfully sneak things, by this point, Joseph Breen was running the Hollywood production code, but yeah, they didn't catch everything. And ironically, because they kept objecting to some of the proposed endings to the story, where like Carmen was going to be like blasted down in a hail of bullets. Finally, Hawks at one point said, "What ending would you propose so that we don't waste time and energy shooting something you're just going to shoot down?" And some of the censors actually came up with the ideas. He's like, "You know what? Those ideas aren't half bad. If you ever get tired of censoring movies, I might hire you as some of my writers." So Hawks did have a he had a relationship with the censors. He wasn't trying to be like, you know, difficult, but he did just want to know, like, what can we do and what can we not, so we don't have to keep reshooting scenes in this goddamn story.
That's very clever of them though as well, because I, you know, in a very small, like I've been in situations where, because I work in sort of straddle between editorial and advertising, and you'd be working for a client, you know, and I did this video series interviewing authors, and one of the people, not a client, on one of the contributors was saying, "Oh, you know, you need to cut it down because it's like, because people have, there's an optimal length in their head for something." And I was saying, and I just thought, the person is only saying that because there's, you know, their perception is that it needs to be excellent. So I just replied and said, "What bits should I remove?" And never got an answer, because they obviously hadn't thought that far. They just thought, "Yeah, just make it shorter." And you're like, "Yeah, but the structure is whatever." Like,
no, it's
so
like
what
the
should we
bit scene
take
in Amadeus with too many notes. It's like, what notes would you would you suggest I remove? And that he's flummoxed.
Yeah. So by putting it back on the censor is very clever way of, you know, just, I don't know, getting them to think. And as we've said about this movie, it is most stories of agents interfering on behalf of their clients are like how they're terrible people, whereas here Lauren Bacall's agent arguably saved the movie, or certainly nudged it in a direction that it was probably heading already, but it got Jack Warner behind it and got all the people behind it, making sure that they were going to sexy it up and steer the ship towards
and apparently Howard Hawks was so annoyed at this time, by this point, that Bogie and Bacall had ignored his advice about not getting involved with each other. He, when it came to time to shoot the reshoots, that was the most professional part of the shoot. Like early on, like the first round of shoots, it was very lackadaisical and relaxed, and everybody's having a good time. Apparently, he was all business. He was fed up with Bacall at this point, and had sold her contract back to Warner Brothers. And also at this point, he was ready to go totally independent. He had relished the independence of working with Howard Hughes on Scarface in the early 30s, and he craved getting that independence back. And the success of The Big Sleep did allow him to have more independence as a producer and a filmmaker moving forward. But in spite of the fact that he was feeling burned by the fact that Bacall chose Bogie over him, they still managed to shoot some great scenes. One of my favorite line by far in the movie is, it's funny, the end of the movie you think would be something related to the plot, but it's all about the romance between these two characters. But he's describing how her sister's going to be locked away in an institution. It's like, oh, they have places for people like that, and maybe they'll cure her, maybe they won't, blah, blah, blah. But he finds like, well, what's wrong with you? And she says, nothing you can't fix. But there's something about the way she says it. It's like, they're going to have sex tonight.
What's wrong with you?
Nothing you can't fix.
I mean, goosebump inducing.
That is the perfect ending to a movie. Like I've watched that movie with, you know, special lady friends, and it's kind of like one of those tests movies. If you don't like this movie, it could be an issue. But
a lot of guys do that with Hawks. Famously, Tarantino had used Rio Bravo. He would be auditioning lady friends as a young man, and if they couldn't get or appreciate Rio Bravo on some level, he knew there was no chance of going the distance. And so, yeah, something about, there's a very masculine tone to the films of Howard Hawks the guys really respond to, but the girls who like Hawks tend to be really fucking cool. And so, yeah, if they can pass the Hawks test, you've probably found one to keep around for a little while.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great movie too. I think people, men and women, get a lot out of it. It's funny sometimes when I showed at work, we do this thing where we go sometimes to the cinema, and I'm the senior person there, and recently went to see, like last year, went to see On the Waterfront, the 50-year.
Which you and I tackled in our Bud Schulberg episode.
Yeah, I guess it was 54, so 24. That's a year and a half ago or 2 years ago. And the credits opened, and I was kind of sitting there. I mean, I love that movie so much, and I was thinking, God, this is all a bit clunky. I was just wondering, is this going to play for people in their 20s and 30s and 40s? But when the film was over, everyone was like high with it. I mean, it was incredible. And same with The Big Sleep. I've shown it. Like some people will. I think The Big Sleep probably has such an enduring popularity because people think, oh, it's an old film, black and white, and you've just showed those kind of clips. They don't expect it to be as saucy as it is. Ooh. And they don't expect it to be as like full of double entendres. Like, as you say, necessity is the mother of invention, and it gets them to be really creative in the writing. If you can't show anything up front, you've got to be clever about it, and it's just sparkling, and it still has the power to kind of shock. It's because people are walking around in suits with fedora hats and gowns.
Also, Hawks, when he uses violence, he uses it very shockingly and abruptly. His style of violence, which you see it in El Dorado and you see it in Only Angels Have Wings and To Have and Have Not. His action scenes are very quick and they're over almost as soon as they start. And there's a scene, I guess it's Brody is about to be shot. He answers the door and he gets shot. In a normal movie, you'd hear the gunshot and he would just crumple down. But Hawks loved to show the impact of bullets on the set dressing or the scenery. Again, famously in movies, sometimes he would have a bullet come up through a desk. But in this case, you see the bullet come through the door. And it's just a small little detail, but it makes the action really hit hard. And then before you even know what happens, the action's over. But Hawks, that was his approach. It made him dislike Peckinpah movies later on. He would joke I can kill 30 guys while he's still killing one. But that was the Hawks style of violence. So yeah, the violence still hits hard. The sex appeal still hits hard. It's beautifully shot. It's got this awe-inspiring score. And then it's got jokes. And sometimes the jokes come from Hawks and his team. And sometimes the jokes come from Chandler. Like when Carmen, who's supposed to be completely naked in the scene, but sadly she is not because it's a 1940s movie. She's talking about whether or not guys are cute, whether or not Philip Marlowe's cute, or is he's cuter than you. And Bogie has the quintessential response.
Is he cute?
No, I think you're telling the truth for a change.
Is he as cute as you are?
Nobody is.
It's humor that's delivered in that kind of deadpan, serious way. It's how we get Leslie Nielsen decades later and how we get like Robert Stack in Airplane. But here's Bogie in the 1940s is not a comedy, but he's fucking hilarious.
Yeah, it's vaudeville stuff. It's really wonderfully entertaining movie. The other thing in the back of my mind, I thought, is just what makes this movie really entertaining is not, again, structure-wise, you kind of, in an Agatha Christie movie, I love those. I got that Canal Plus, so I could rewatch all Death on the Nile and all the Peter Ustinov ones. Are just so entertaining Sunday afternoon movies.
Murder on the Orient Express. Yeah, I mean, it's Hall of Fame stuff.
But they kind of,
I guess that was who played Poirot and Murder on the Orient Express?
Albert Finney.
Albert Finney, he's marvelous.
They're great. But usually they go along the lines that, okay, let's introduce all the characters, they're all rushing for a train, or they're all going to dinner, or they're all, hurry up, there's the vicar, and there's the, these are all the characters, and then at the end, we'll bring all those characters together again, the ones that are still alive, and we'll give you the murder. Whereas because what's really well translated is the Chandler Philip Marlowe books are all told in the first person. It says I. I walked through this room and I was greeted by. So you are the detective going on the journey. So in The Big Sleep, Harry Jones arrives in the film and Agnes Lozier, when the film's about an hour and 20 minutes into it, you're like, wow, these characters are unbelievable. And Canino, the villain, who is one of the scariest henchmen, there's a line where he meets Agnes in the car and she's saying that she knows where Eddie Marr's wife is. And that's funny. When I watched the 45 version there, they reshot the scene where he at the end where he wakes up in the ropes, and she says, "Oh, you must be Eddie Marr's wife," and she says, "Oh yeah, Eddie Marr's. He's yeah, that one there." And he's you know, Eddie Marr's never killed anybody. He's a killer by remote. And she throws the water in his face and storms off. And Bogart says, "She's all right. I like her," you know. And but in the reshoot, they got a hotter actress to play Eddie Marr's wife. They got someone else. They recast it, and I guess it was a case that he says to Eddie Marr's, "You know, you're not really busting your balls trying to find this woman, your ex-wife, and from what I hear, you know, she's someone that you'd want to find." So they somewhere along the line decided to recast it when they were reshooting that bit because the plot didn't quite make sense. But when Agnes discovers that's where Eddie Marr's wife is holed out, she says that she spotted this guy Canino, and Bogart says, "Oh yeah, I met him." And she says, "Yeah, there are some people you don't forget, even if you've only seen them once." And that perfectly sums up this brute who he meets in the lockup garage, who gives him a bunch of fives, literally like 5 nickel pieces or whatever the denominator.
The coins drop out of his hand after
coins just drop out after he socks him on the jaw.
I don't know if people even know what that means anymore, but people once upon a time, you'd have so much spare change, you'd get these little, like my grandfather would have me fill them up. You have these little like paper rolls, and you'd shove the pennies and the dimes and the nickels and quarters in. But if you held a roll full of quarters and hit somebody, it was like holding brass knuckles. You do is hit them like a thunderbolt. And so that's used in a lot of these old fashioned movies. All right. So as we get closer to the end of this recording, and as somebody who is an enthusiast for the book, an enthusiast for the movie, but also someone who's a journalist and a writer in their own right, I want to do a little creative exercise. And this is my curveball, hard-hitting journalism. I would like to test your knowledge and have Simon O'Neill summarize the plot of The Big Sleep in his own words, from his own point of view, emphasizing the scenes that are most important. But famously, people love discussing how the movie doesn't necessarily tie up all the loose ends. The book does a much better job of it. But if you were to describe the story, your own synopsis of the plot, let's give you the Big Sleep challenge. What is the story of The Big Sleep?
Wow. Well, I know who killed Owen Taylor. And I'm going to spill the beans right now. Well, before I do that, I'm just going to say, I think Joe Brody killed Owen Taylor. I don't think it's complicated. I mean, we can't be certain of anything. But when he talked to Joe Brody says, "Oh, well, I went along and I played copper and I sapped him down." And, you know, obviously criminals always minimalize what they did. So we know that he probably beat him really hard on the back of the head with a sap or a blackjack, because that's what people did in those days, and then went off and either sent the car into the water or Owen Taylor drove off, but he was he had a hematoma on his brain and he just drove himself into the water. Anyway, that cleared up that mystery there. Or anyway, that's what I think will happen. So the plot is, so Marlowe arrives at the house of General Sternwood, who's been blackmailed, and who has these 2 wild daughters, and both pretty and both pretty wild. Yeah. And he's hired to get the blackmailer off Colonel Sternwood's back, ostensibly. But the subtext is a guy called Sean Rusty Regan has run off, and the colonel just wants to know he's okay because he's become a surrogate father to him. So Marlowe goes off looking, and along the way, he discovers various things, but he doesn't discover Sean Regan because Sean Regan is dead. Sean Regan has been murdered long before Philip Marlowe's foot ever hits the tarmac of the Sternwood driveway. But just like Morris Chandler, you know, dead men. Marlowe says? Dead men are heavier than broken hearts. You know, like, so. The shadow of Sean Regan is spread over this entire place. So he goes about his business to try and find Sean Regan, and along the way discovers a few things about Vivian and Carmen, and he discovers a pornography racket, a little bit of drug dealing, and then this leads him towards the gambler Eddie Mars, whose wife is taken off. Then we find out towards the end, actually, Carmen has killed Sean Rusty Regan, because like Marlowe, he doesn't suffer fools, and he didn't buy any of her stuff, and he sent her packing. She didn't like that. She killed him. So in order to cover up the crime, Eddie Mars' wife snuck out of town so that everyone could pretend that she ran off with Sean Regan. And then when the heat died down, she could come back. But Marlowe finds out where they're hidden, and he goes to the little cabin in the woods and kills Eddie Mars' best man, and then goes back to the house where he discovered Carmen's drug-addled body, and there's the final shootout. Something like that.
And what would you say is the key difference between the ending of the novel versus the ending of the movie? Because the novel, reading it just now, it was, I got to kind of fall in love with the story all over again because I got a fresh spin on the ending.
Well, you tell me, because it's so long since I've read the novel. Like, I mean,
so
it kind of blurs in my head.
You think the dust is settled, and you think that all's said and done, but Marlowe's returning the gun to Carmen. She's in a very flirtatious way. It's like, oh, well, won't you teach me how to shoot? And he's kind of playing along, and you suspect maybe he's not being completely upfront with her. Oh yeah, I'd be happy to. Like, do you have a spot in mind? They go down to the like this kind of abandoned like oil rig, and he loads the gun for her, and he's walking over to set up some cans for her to shoot. She pulls the gun on him, and she acknowledges she is about to kill him then and there because he rejected her advances when she was naked in his bed, and she's furious, blah, blah, blah. That's when he realizes, or he basically confronts her with the fact that she killed Sean Regan and that her sister covered it up, and that her sister's basically been putting up a giant smokescreen ever since, trying to hide from the world that her sister is, into pornography and into murdering people and a nymphomaniac and all these wonderful, and a drug addict and all these wonderful attributes. And that's when Bogie, or I keep on calling it Bogie and Bacall, but Carmen and Philip Marlowe have their final confrontation. And at the very end, like on the very last page, he they have a little conversation about whether we haven't even mentioned Norris yet, but whether or not Norris knows the truth. And of course, Norris does know the truth. But anyway, it just leaves with Marlowe kind of abandoning Carmen into her life of sin and depravity and that sort of thing. But you finally get the big revelation that she's been playing an active role in all these crimes every step of the way, just trying to disguise the fact that her sister is stark raving nuts and probably belongs in an institution. And so it's just a little meaner and a little nastier, and obviously a little bit more pornographic, just acknowledging the fact that she likes, shooting up heroin and posing naked for pornographers and, screwing anything that wears pants. And so, yeah, it's a very, very satisfying ending. But obviously the movie, as the music swells and he says, "What's wrong with you?" And she says, "Nothing you can't fix." It just sends you out of the theater doing cartwheels, and you're like, all right, well, when can we watch it again? I want to see more Bogie and Bacall.
Yeah, both are great. Both are absolutely great. It's funny when he walks into the house up on the hill where Carmen has been drugged and had the photographs taken. Everything. It's such a great scene. She's wearing that kind of geisha outfit and everything, and it's all very. There's obviously opium has been smoked around here, and there's a dead body on the floor, and yeah, it's very atmospheric, I gotta say. And the funny thing is, when I was watching the Vickers cut, actually has two scenes put back into it with Martha Vickers, but both of them sort of put her in a bad light. So you could imagine Lauren Bacall going, "Okay, I can greenlight these scenes going back in," because the first one is where she sneaks into his apartment and he sends her packing. So obviously Bogart rejects her, so that scene can stay. And then the other scene after he brings her back to the house, when he discovers her with the guy Geiger dead on the ground. In the 45 version, he just says, yeah, she's in the car and wanders off into the rain. But in the 46 version, he brings her upstairs and sort of unceremoniously dumps her on the bed.
Hurls her bodily as she kind of bounces when she lands.
And you played the clip there when she's says,
like, "Did you do this?" Yeah. Oh yeah, it's a special service offered to all my clients. Yeah.
But what it also does is it gives Bogart another reason. Like, he's in her bedroom at 2:00 in the morning. It adds to the sexual tension.
Absolutely.
He's just going through the rain, and he's suddenly in a lady's bedroom at 2 a.m., which obviously the Irish film censor would not approve of. Wouldn't.
He still has 1 foot on the floor. He's not breaking any rules, but obviously a massive age disparity as well. I think on To Have and Have Not, when they first fell in love, I believe Lauren Bacall was 19 and Bogie was like 43 or 44, but it was a different time. They were in love.
Well, love.
And she stayed with him until he died from cancer in the late 50s. And she had other loves in her life. She married Jason Robards eventually, and she continued to live her life.
Yeah, I mean, there was a while there where it looked like she was going to marry Frank Sinatra, because Frank Sinatra, like the Rat Pack, was actually the phrase coined by Bogart, not Sinatra. Everyone thinks of the Rat Pack, and Bogart was the unofficial chairman of the Rat Pack until he passed away, and then Sinatra sort of assumed the mantle, and the idea was that he would then hook up with Lauren Bacall. They talked about getting married, but it didn't take, as they say.
And she kept that deep, sultry voice right until the end of her career. She just had a classic delivery style. I still think she has the better performance in To Have and Have Not. But if you want to see true love, The Big Sleep is when you get the full flowering of all their lovely flirtations. But To Have and Have Not, every time I watch it, I'm like, oh, this is Hawks' best movie. But he's got like 5 or 6. Where every time I watch him, I'm like, oh no, this is Hawks' best movie. And The Big Sleep is obviously in that rotation as well, but
she worked all the way up into her, she was in The Sopranos, she's in this amazing scene, and so she gets decked, and
she had like a 60-year career.
Incredible. So but I was just going to add that when just to wrap it up a little bit, but just when the Big Sleep came out. Big Sleep was the first of 7 Marlowe novels that you have to look forward to. And number 2 is Farewell, My Lovely, and some people think it's the best. I would rate it as in the top 2. And then there Chandler was halfway through, not halfway, he was about a quarter of the way, I don't know, 3,000, 5,000 words into the book that would become Poodle Springs when he died in 1959. And years later, in the 1980s, there used to be a TV series called Spencer with Robert Urich as a private detective called Spencer. And they were all written by this guy called Robert B. Parker. And so in the 80s, the Chandler estate got together and said, why don't you finish this this novel that are because Chandler didn't have any children with Sissy, so the estate, I presumably, is the relatives, and maybe some of those old Quaker connections, and said, well, why don't you finish this book? So on the back we've got a picture of Raymond Chandler and a picture of Robert B. Parker, and we've got this beautiful,
a lot of writers are in that situation where they die with their last novel unfinished. Famously, Robert Jordan, who wrote all these famous fantasy novels, he died with the series unfinished, and he brought in Brandon Sanderson to finish a trilogy to wrap things up. But oh my God, I'm totally blanking. Who wrote Great Expectations and
Charles Dickens?
Charles Dickens. I think he writing Bleak House, or there's some book, or maybe it was, I can't remember which book, or The Mystery of Edwin Drood. He was writing something when he died, but they just published the unfinished version of his novel, as opposed to having somebody step in and try to finish things. Or F. Scott Fitzgerald in The Last Tycoon, he died with the novel unfinished, but the fragments have been published as the book, and Elia Kazan turned it into a movie in the 70s.
Yeah, Dickens probably only had 400 chapters written for that book and hadn't quite finished it, But yeah, so they finished that, and I read this. It's quite good. It's like the thing you're kind of saying, where's the scene? can I notice when one stops and the other starts?
Where's
And
the
then in
passing
early
of the baton? Yeah.
Yeah, and in the early 2000s, Marlowe is back. After a long goodbye and a big sleep, it's time to welcome back the world's greatest private eye, as opposed to detective, his Sherlock Holmes. And that is our own Irish John Banville, with his book, The Black-Eyed Blonde. I can't remember how I got this because it's a preview copy. It says not for resale. And then a couple of years later, Lawrence Osborne wrote this fantastic book called Only to Sleep, which features Marlowe as a 70-year-old retiree in Mexico who's kind of gone down there to live the quiet life, but gets drawn back for that one last job. There's something from his past reaches out, as happens, and pulls him back in. So yeah, Marlowe still sort of lives on, and he's still going. But
yeah, and I suspect he will continue to live on as long as people keep reading books and watching movies. Philip Marlowe will never fully go into the big sleep.
Yeah, and I mean, I presume you know, of course, that the phrase "mean streets" comes from Chandler.
I did not know that. No.
Yeah, so in like there was this flurry of the films. There was Murder My Sweet. There was The Brasher Doubloon. Like in the 40s, there were quite a lot of Marlowe films all at once, and then there was that weird Marlowe movie in 1960 with James Garner, and Bruce Lee makes a very funny cameo in it. Yeah,
destroys his office.
Yeah, destroys his office, which is fun, but that's not a good film. And then in the 70s, you had it's an amazing double bill, The Long Goodbye and Farewell My Lovely. So you have The Long Goodbye, which is a total modernist take with Elliot Gould, which I didn't really like when I saw it first, but I've kind of grudgingly come to like it. And then
it's more of a Robert Altman experience as opposed to a Raymond Chandler experience. But if you like Robert Altman movies, The Long Goodbye is essential viewing.
It's great. Really does benefit from a lot of reviews. And then you have the Robert Mitchum in Farewell My Lovely, which is probably my favorite Marlowe adaptation. But yeah, there was this kind of flurry of them, and then nothing, for a while. But in '76, Scorsese directed a film called Mean Streets, and the phrase comes from, there was again, The Simple Art of Murder. Raymond Chandler wrote this book. It's like How to Be a Detective, and he wrote. He's kind of talking about the detective story, and he says, "Down these mean streets a man must go who is not himself mean, who is neither tarnished nor afraid. He is the hero, he is everything. He must be a complete man and a common man, and yet an unusual man. He must be, to use a rather weathered phrase, a man of honor, by instinct, by inevitability, without thought of it, and certainly without saying it. He must be the best man in his world and a good enough man for any world. He will take no man's money dishonestly and no man's insolence without a due and dispassionate revenge. He is a lonely man, and his pride is that you will treat him as a proud man or be very sorry you ever saw him. The story is this man's adventure in search of a hidden truth, and it would be no adventure if it did not happen to a man fit for adventure. If there were enough like him, the world would be a very safe place to live in without becoming too dull to be worth living in." And that's his summation of not just the Marlowe character, but the detective character in general in these types of movies.
Or you could just borrow the phrase that you have on your Twitter, aka X profile, which is
just a guy who's paid to do other people's laundry,
which I have right here.
Now, the only way you could have known enough to do that was by being there and seeing what happened, or having the picture and knowing when and where it was taken. That makes sense, doesn't it?
Who are you, and what do you get out of this?
Just a guy who's paid to do other people's laundry.
Yeah, there's. I mean, you can keep on quote the other bit when the general asks him, who are you, Marlowe? And he goes, well, there's not, or tell me about yourself. There's not much to say. I went to college. I'm 33, and I went to college. But I can still
speak English, like when the situation calls for it, or something to that effect. I can't remember how he exactly phrases it.
Kind of, how he phrases it is, I haven't been corrupted so much by college that I no longer have command of the English language, or something like that.
It's a great bit. Yeah, it's one of the most quotable movies of this era by far, and it all boils back to the fact that Howard Hawks did have a great reverence for a really good story. And he loved working with great novelists, and he loved putting them in combative, competing environments. Like when they did To Have and Have Not, he joked to Ernest Hemingway, he said, this is once again, Howard Hawks telling tall tales. Who knows if it's true or not, but it makes a great story. He told Ernest Hemingway he could make a hit movie out of his worst book. And he said, well, what's my worst book? And he said, well, To Have and Have Not's a bunch of junk. And then he went off and hired William Faulkner, one of Ernest Hemingway's chief rivals, to do the screenplay adaptation. So he just loved, the kind of stirring the pot and putting all these writers in a room together. And they cranked out one great movie after another. And I've got a great little excerpt here where he talks about the kinds of stories he's attracted to and which kinds of stories he likes to make.
I have a favorite of getting a good story that I can tell. I haven't made a comedy in quite a while for a simple reason: I haven't found a story. Westerns are tough to find. The easiest story to find is a plain dramatic story, such as Bogart and To Have and Have Not, The Big Sleep. They're the easiest. I call those wheelchair jobs.
Love that. Wheelchair jobs. You can just, because you can direct them from a wheelchair on the set. He loved the comfort of the soundstage and that sort of thing. But yeah, he could be very dismissive about his own work. But obviously, To Have and Have Not and The Big Sleep were so successful and so popular. They sent his career in a completely new direction from that point on, where he got to exercise and enjoy a hell of a lot more independence. But it also would get him into trouble with some of his movies like Land of the Pharaohs and things like that. And a lot of his minions and crew members that worked on The Big Sleep would go on to bigger and better things. Like famously Christian Nyby, who edited the film, was a real Hawks disciple, and he would direct The Thing from Another World in 1951, which Hawks was there on the set sometimes he wasn't, but a lot of people have accused him of kind of directing over Nyby's shoulder. But yeah, this was the beginning of the Hawks empire, which would endure for like the next 30 years until sadly he would go on to The Big Sleep himself. But he left his mark. And even more importantly, there are so many filmmakers who just fell in love with his work, from Walter Hill to John Carpenter to Quentin Tarantino to Martin Scorsese. And so I always feel like you can measure the success of a director by how many disciples they inspire to go back and try to create something in their style or build upon it or whatever the case might be. But yeah, Hawks, he is the man. And you can just tell his personality, you can feel it in every frame of his films, where they're shot in a very matter-of-fact, kind of simple, methodical way. And sometimes people overstate the simplicity of his visual style and how he preferred all those medium shots, because every once in a while he does give you some really beautiful close-ups, like Bacall down in the car, kissing Bogart, saying, I like that, I'd like more. Like, he's not afraid of a close-up. He just uses them for maximum impact at the appropriate time. Like, nobody can come up with a shot like this unless they have a strong visual sense. So yeah, I think people overstate the simplicity of Hawks's visual style, but what you cannot deny is he had really good taste in books and really good taste in writers. So I thank you for urging me to do this video today, because I fucking love this movie. I love it more than I ever have before. And now that I've read the book, it only informs my love and affection for this movie. And it's been an absolute blast covering this topic with you.
Yeah, absolutely. The film looks gorgeous, and the guy who shot it went on to shoot White Heat a couple of years later.
Hell yeah! Raoul Walsh, another legend.
Yeah, and so and again, the fact that it is sort of stage bound, or as in sound stage bound, kind of gives it its own little atmosphere. But yeah, it rewards multiple viewings and is fabulously entertaining movie. One of the most entertaining Hollywood movies in any genre. Never mind.
I think it's no overstatement to say it is the quintessential Warner Brothers movie. When people say, what is Warner Brothers? What does the brand stand for? In the 30s and 40s, when they were in their heyday, it was tough talking crime films. And even Casablanca at times resembles a kind of a tough talking crime film, even if it's a movie about World War II. But yeah, Warner Brothers in the 40s was at their creative zenith, thanks to movies like The Big Sleep. And so, yeah, if somebody were to say, I'm only going to watch one Warner Brothers movie ever made, which one should I watch? The Big Sleep would be a very strong contender.
Yeah, and I'm kind of jealous that you haven't read any of the other books, because you get to experience them for the first time. So next up on the slate is Farewell, My Lovely. As I say, that is absolute, that's Chandler at his peak generally recognize that the two best books are Farewell, My Lovely and The Long Goodbye. A lot of people say that. Now, the book he wrote just before he passed away was Playback. A lot of people don't really rate that. I think it's fantastic. And sometimes it could be my favorite Raymond Chandler. It's from that era that they call tail fin noir. You know, you heard that phrase, like where it's like.
not.
So there was a guy on YouTube, and he had a channel called Full Moon Matinee. It was great, and he just showed rare film noir movies on YouTube. But I went to look for it there a few weeks ago, and it's gone. He's been zapped by YouTube. I was like thinking to myself, how is this guy getting away with putting all these copyrighted movies?
He hadn't been caught yet.
Yeah. So he was caught. Somebody dropped the dime, and he went down. And he describes those movies like Nightfall that we talked about that are all sort of mid to late 50s as tail fin noirs. So you look at The Big Sleep, everyone's driving these Packards. They're all curved shaped. And then suddenly you get the 50s with these huge tail fins on the back of the cars.
Gotcha.
So
like the Kiss Me Deadly, Touch of Evil era.
Yeah, Nightfall, stuff like that. And then, so that's the last completed Marlowe novel. And they wanted to make it into a movie. So they commissioned Chandler to write the movie screenplay, because at that stage he was out of Hollywood and he was out of contract. And this was sort of so that book began as a screenplay. So he wrote it in the early to mid 50s, and then when the studio decided they weren't going to bother making it, he said, well, hell, I'll turn it into a novel. He turned it into the last completed Marlowe novel. So but they never made the film, which is kind of crazy. I always think, I have a copy of this, the script is floating around the internet, you can read it. It would be like that they discovered that there was an Ian Fleming script of an unfilmed James Bond story. You think somebody would go and make that.
Ian Fleming right here. I've only read the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I've read the first 6. Goldfinger's up next, because obviously the books and the movies are in a different order. But I've been saving Goldfinger. I've heard that with Ian Fleming, there is a point where the novels start to kind of fade, but so far in the first 6 they have not faded. My favorite Ian Fleming is From Russia with Love, but the From Russia with Love, Dr. No kind of 1-2 punch is very tough to resist.
Yeah, I mean, similar. There's a little dip in the middle with it's funny, the High Window is the Chandler one where he said, I'm going to stop cannibalizing my old stories, because a lot of the time because he wrote all those short stories, he would take them and readapt them into the longer novels. And some people say that's why The Big Sleep doesn't really make, why there's sort of continuity errors, is because that's 2 stories. It's Killer in the Rain and The Curtain are 2 stories that he wrote in the 30s. And then when he was sitting down to write The Big Sleep, he stitched those 2 together. Gotcha. And with The High Window, The High Window is a good example of, it's all plot. It almost does end with, the film ends with the Marlowe character gathering everyone in a room and saying, this is the person that did it because of and I was watching it thinking, that's not really how a Philip Marlowe mystery should. There should be much more loose ends. There should be much more untidy business. And he thought that himself, and he went back to doing what he does best. So, but yeah, the Farewell, My Lovely is going to be a great reading experience. And then you can watch the Murder, My Sweet and Farewell, My Lovely double bill from both.
Yeah, I've seen the movies. I just, the novel's on my shelf gathering dust. And it's funny, with The Big Sleep, my first attempt at quote unquote reading it was during COVID. There was nothing to do in Manhattan. I would walk around at night listening to the audio fiction, and it felt very Chandler-esque, walking around these dark streets where there were no cars and no people, and it was just a very strange, uncertain time. But for whatever reason, I kind of fell off and never got back on. But it was much better actually reading it, holding it in my hands. And it was my journey with Chandler is not over. But one final question before we wrap up, I wanted to share this pick from the spring of 2022. When are we going to have a chance to have another proper bonding session? Are any of your journalistic travels or filmmaking adventures ever going to bring you to New York, or am I going to need to get Scurry and Robert Amara, back on a plane to fly over to Ireland for a proper hang session? For people who don't know, in the spring of 2022, Robert Amara directed these documentaries that we posted on my channel, Once Upon a Time in Ireland, where the four of us would visit famous movie locations around Ireland and just talk about the movies that were shot there. And so you and I got to talk about The Dead and Fistful of Dynamite and all kinds of good movies. But it was I feel like for like a 3-day trip, we packed in quite a few really cool experiences and a lot of good movie commentary as well.
Yeah, the last time I was in New York was 2018, so definitely due a trip back there. My cousin lives in New York, and I love New York. I went to New York on my J1, lived in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, Alphabet City, back when it was a crazy place. And so I need to organize something, and
we'll have the obligatory McSorley's trip. And went recently during the premiere of Hokum, the New York premiere of Hokum, a bunch of Irish cast and crew were here in New York, and so I got to go out and go to the premiere and the after party. But we did start the day at McSorley's before the actual premiere. And but once again, I said this when I was in Ireland in 2022, and I'll say it again now. But I've never experienced more kind of warmth and hospitality and like a more welcoming environment than when I went over to Ireland. It's a very, very friendly country, and I felt that spirit all over again when hanging out with the Irish crew from Hokum. And so, if you're from a special place, so I need to get back over there.
Yeah, one side of the Atlantic or the other, we'll have to make that happen. Get the old thinking caps on and do it.
Beautiful. Well, where can people find your articles? Where can people find your films? Where can people find anything and everything related to the wonderful Simon O'Neill? If they want to continue their journey into your oeuvre.
Well, there's not that many of them, but you can just search my name on The Times or thetimes.com or simononeil.net. And and I'm on Twitter. I don't really use social media a lot these days, but I am sim_O'Neill.
Beautiful. And I will share that in the information in the video description below. But we hope you've enjoyed this conversation. We broke my one rule. People always say in movies you should show, don't tell. But of course, this famously is a movie where they tell but don't show. But it breaks all the rules. But I also have a rule with my YouTube channel. You're not allowed to talk about a movie for longer than the running time of the movie, because if the filmmakers can say all they want to say about it in a particular time, we should as well. But I made an exception for The Big Sleep because there's just too much good stuff to get to. And we left a lot of stuff on the cutting room floor that we haven't even gotten to yet. But people should read the book. They should watch the flick and watch the flick again and watch the flick again, and then circle back and just let us know what you think down in the comments below. But if you enjoyed this video, remember to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, become a member, all the good stuff. But thanks again for watching. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.
It ain't like it used to be, but it'll do.
You know how to whistle, don't you, Steve? You just put your lips together and blow.